Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been sitting on this for over 30 years now. Most of you will think I'm making this up or exaggerating, but I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to share is 100% true. My friends and I experienced something in 1991 that completely changed how we view the world, and specifically the woods we grew up exploring. It was August 9th, 1991. I was 19 at the time. Me and three of my buddies, I'll call them Tyler, Ethan and Noah, decided to go deer spotting in Blackridge Woods. The area sits right near the border between Westmoreland and Indiana counties in Pennsylvania. We'd been going there since we were kids, knew those woods like the backs of our hands, or at least we thought we did. It was late afternoon, probably around 5:30 or so. The plan was to scout for deer before hunting season, see what was out there, maybe track some movements. Normal stuff we'd done 100 times before. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, just a slight breeze. Sun starting to get lower, but still plenty of daylight left. We'd been out there for maybe 2 hours already, just walking quietly, checking out different areas where we'd seen deer in previous years. Tyler had brought his dad's binoculars, and we were taking turns using them to scan the tree line ahead. Noah was keeping notes about where we spotted tracks or droppings. We came to this small clearing that opened up to a hillside covered in berry bushes. Blackberries were in season, and we knew deer loved them. So we positioned ourselves at the edge of the tree line, staying in the shadows, and just watched. This was a prime spot. We figured if we waited quietly, eventually some deer would show up to feed. After about 20 minutes of just sitting there whispering occasionally, Ethan nudged me and pointed toward the far side of the berry patch, maybe 200 feet away. I saw movement in the bushes, something dark. My first thought was, buck, and I got excited. I lifted the binoculars to get a better look. What I saw through those lenses didn't make any sense at first. It was big, way too big for a deer. Dark, almost black, and covered in hair. My brain instantly went to bear, which wasn't common but not unheard of in those parts. But then it stood up. I remember saying holy shit under my breath. Tyler was asking what I saw, and I just handed him the binoculars without saying anything. The guys could tell from my face something was off. Tyler looked through the binoculars for about 10 seconds, then whispered, "What the fuck is that?" One by one, we all got a look, and then just stared with our naked eyes. The thing was massive, standing fully upright on 2 legs while picking berries with its hands, not paws, hands. It was covered in dark hair from head to toe, thick and matted in some places. The hair looked almost oily in the late afternoon sun. For a minute we thought maybe it was someone in a costume, but who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? And it was huge, way taller than any of us. Plus the movements were too fluid, too natural. No costume I'd ever seen moved like that. I remember the silence between us as we watched it. We were all frozen, not even daring to whisper. The creature just kept picking berries, putting them in its mouth, but the whole time, and this is what really freaked me out, it kept looking in our direction. I swear it knew we were there. The weirdest part was its eyes. When it would turn its head toward us, there was this dull red glow, not like a bright light, more like the way a cat's eyes reflect in low light, but red, deep red. I've never seen anything like it before or since. And the smell, God, the smell. It took me a few minutes to notice it because I was so focused on what I was seeing, but there was this distinct odor in the air, like sulfur or rotten eggs, mixed with something musky. It wasn't overpowering, but it was definitely there, getting stronger as we watched. None of us spoke. We just stared. This thing had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall. It continued eating berries, reaching up easily to branches that would have been a stretch for me, and I'm 6'2". The way it moved was so unsettling, not quite human, but definitely not like any animal I'd ever seen. It had this rolling gait, shoulders broader than any person's should be, arms longer than normal proportion. The whole time we watched it, it never fully turned away from us. It would reach for berries, pick them with these large hands, bring them to its mouth, but its head would barely turn away from our direction. Those eyes, I still see them sometimes when I close my eyes at night. After about 5 minutes of this, though it felt like hours, Noah tugged on my shirt sleeve. When I looked at him, his face was pale. He nodded toward the path behind us, clearly wanting to leave. None of us argued. We backed away as quietly as possible, not turning our backs until we were well into the trees. Then we just ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. We didn't stop until we reached Tyler's truck, and even then, we just piled in without a word and locked the doors. The drive back was mostly silent. Finally, Ethan said what we were all thinking. That wasn't a bear. We spent the rest of the evening at Tyler's house, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We went back and forth between rational explanations, a bear with mange, some weirdo in a costume, hell, even one of those realistic movie props someone put out there to freak people out. But deep down, we all knew. Nobody wanted to say Bigfoot out loud. It sounded so stupid, so cliché. But what else could it have been? 9 feet tall, walking upright the entire time, covered in hair, those eyes. It wasn't human, and it sure as hell wasn't any normal animal. We agreed to go back the next day, in daylight, with more people. Part of me didn't want to, but I had to know. I barely slept that night, just kept seeing those red eyes staring at me through the darkness. The next morning, we rounded up 2 more friends who hadn't been with us. They thought we were pulling their leg, but agreed to come along anyway. We also brought my dog, a German shepherd named Max, who was usually fearless. We got to Blackridge around 10 a.m. Max was acting strange from the moment we parked the truck. His ears were back, tail down, and he kept whining. He never acted like that, especially not in the woods, which he loved. That was our first sign that something was still off. We hiked back to the berry patch, which took longer than expected because we were all on edge, jumping at every sound. When we finally got there, the area looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow. But what we found confirmed we hadn't imagined things. The spot where the creature had been standing was clearly visible. The grass and smaller plants were completely flattened in an area about 3 feet in diameter. The berry bushes nearby were picked clean in a way that didn't look like normal animal feeding. Branches were broken at a height that would have been above my head, and most telling, some of the breaks weren't fresh, they were deliberate, like someone had carefully snapped them to get at the berries higher up. There were no clear footprints. The ground was too hard and covered with pine needles and forest debris, but there were depressions where something heavy had stood. To get perspective on the height, Noah, who's 6'4", stood in the spot where the creature had been, while Tyler and I went back to where we'd been watching from. Looking through the binoculars, it was clear that whatever we saw had to have been at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. Noah looked small from our vantage point, but the creature had filled our field of vision. The smell was still there too, fainter but unmistakable. That sulfur smell. Max refused to get near the flattened area, pulling at his leash and whining when we tried to bring him closer. One of our friends, who hadn't been there the previous day, was skeptical at first, but seeing our reactions and the evidence changed his mind. The other guy tried to play it cool, but I noticed he kept looking over his shoulder, scanning the tree line. We took some measurements, looked for hair or other evidence, but found nothing conclusive beyond the flattened vegetation and broken branches. After about an hour, no one wanted to stay any longer. The woods felt different now, unwelcoming. Even in broad daylight, I kept feeling like we were being watched. On the way back, we spread out a bit more than we had on the hike in. I ended up walking next to Tyler, who'd been my best friend since elementary school. He was the most rational guy I knew, studying engineering in college. He looked at me and said quietly, so the others couldn't hear, "You know what we saw, right?" I nodded. We both knew. That day changed everything for us. Tyler, who practically lived in those woods before, refused to go back after dark. Noah transferred to a college out of state the next semester. Ethan got really into researching cryptids and unexplained phenomena, which eventually cost him a serious relationship when his girlfriend got tired of his obsession. Me, I still go hunting, still hike, but never alone, never in Blackridge Woods, and I'm always aware of my surroundings in a way I never was before. I'm the guy who's constantly looking over his shoulder, scanning the trees. My wife thinks I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. Over the years, I've heard other stories from that area. Nothing as direct as what we experienced, but enough to make me believe we weren't the only ones who encountered something strange in those woods. Most people around here won't talk about it openly. You get labeled as crazy pretty quick, but after a few beers around a campfire, the stories come out. I've tried to research what we might have seen. The red eyes don't match typical Bigfoot descriptions. The sulfur smell is often associated with more supernatural entities in folklore. But I know what I saw wasn't supernatural. It was flesh and blood, something physical that broke branches and left depressions in the ground. To this day, I can't explain what we encountered in Blackridge Woods. I just know that it was real, it was intelligent, and it was aware of us just as we were aware of it. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching hikers and hunters from the shadows, picking berries with those two long arms, red eyes glowing in the dimming light. I haven't told this story much. People don't believe you, or they think you're exaggerating, but I needed to get it out. 30 years is a long time to carry something like this, wondering if you're crazy, questioning your own memories. But I know what I saw. We all do. And Blackridge Woods will never be just woods to me again. Story 2. I've debated posting this for years. Most of my friends and family think I'm either crazy or just saw something normal and misinterpreted it. But I know what I saw. I've replayed it in my mind thousands of times since that night in '88, and I'm still just as certain today as I was then. It was March 19th, 1988. I remember the exact date because it was the day before my sister's birthday, and I was coming back from the mall where I'd gone to buy her a gift after my late shift. I work construction, been a foreman for almost 15 years now, and we had a tight deadline on a commercial project in Greensburg, so we were putting in extra hours. It was cold that night, around 35 degrees. The kind of Pennsylvania cold that feels like it seeps through your clothes no matter how many layers you've got on. I was driving my old Ford F-150, the blue one, with the dent in the passenger door from when my buddy Mike backed into it at a job site. The heater was barely working, and I had to keep wiping fog off the inside of the windshield with my glove. By the time I left the mall, it was already past midnight. I decided to take the back roads through Dairy Township to get home faster. There's this stretch on Pine Valley Road where the trees crowd right up to the gravel shoulder on both sides. No streetlights, and houses are few and far between. Just woods, darkness, and whatever critters are out at night. The clock on my dashboard read 12:43 when I turned onto Pine Valley. I remember glancing at it and thinking I'd be home by 1:15 if I didn't hit any ice. The moon was almost full that night, which was lucky because my right headlight had been flickering on and off for about a week, and I hadn't had time to fix it yet. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show about UFOs or government conspiracies. I always found that stuff entertaining but ridiculous. I was a practical guy, you know. I believed in what I could see, touch, and build with my own two hands. Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts. That was all nonsense for people with too much time on their hands. At least that's what I thought until 12:45 a.m. I had just rounded a bend in the road, doing maybe 40 mph, when my headlights caught something moving on the right side of the road. I instinctively eased off the gas, thinking it might be a deer. We get tons of them around here, and hitting one can total your car. Sure enough, A deer bolted out from the tree line, maybe 5 car lengths ahead of me. It was a good-sized doe, and she was running flat out, not the casual trot they sometimes do when crossing roads. This thing was terrified, moving faster than I'd ever seen a deer run. I hit the brakes harder, slowing to maybe 25 map. That's when I saw it. Right behind the deer, emerging from the exact same spot in the trees, was something else. Something that didn't belong in the Pennsylvania woods, not in any woods. It was running on 2 legs, not lumbering or shambling, but running with purpose, chasing the deer. It was tall, I'd guess at least 7 feet, maybe more. Broad shoulders, massive arms that swung with its stride. The whole body was covered in dark hair or fur that looked black in the moonlight, but might have been dark brown. The thing that still haunts me is how it moved. It wasn't clumsy or awkward like you'd expect something that big to be. It was fluid, powerful, covering ground with these long strides that easily kept pace with the deer. Its arms pumped like a runner's, but there was something wrong about the way the joints worked, like they bent in ways a human shouldn't. I only saw it for maybe 3 seconds total. The deer shot across the road with this thing right behind it, both of them disappearing into the woods on my left side. But in those 3 seconds, I saw enough to know that whatever was chasing that deer wasn't human, and it wasn't a bear or any other animal I've encountered in 40-plus years of living in rural Pennsylvania. My headlights caught it in profile as it crossed, and I could make out a vague face, not clearly, just the suggestion of features set in a massive head that sat directly on those shoulders with barely any neck. No clothes, no gear, just hair and muscle and speed. I remember my hands going numb on the steering wheel. My foot moved from the brake to the gas pedal without me even thinking about it. I accelerated hard, the back tires spinning a bit on the damp asphalt before catching. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road, about 3 miles later. My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over at the Sunoco station just to catch my breath. The teenager working the night shift gave me a weird look through the window, but I didn't go in. I just sat there, engine running, heater now blasting, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I've hunted these woods my whole life. I know every animal native to this region. I know what bears look like when they stand on their hind legs. I know what people in costumes look like. This wasn't either of those things. When I finally got home around 1:30, my wife was asleep. I didn't wake her. Instead, I called my brother, Mark. He's a wildlife officer with the state, has been for almost 20 years. If anyone would know what I might have seen, it would be him. "Do you know what time it is?" he answered, his voice groggy with sleep. I didn't bother apologizing. "Mark, I just saw something on Pine Valley Road. Something chasing a deer. Probably a coyote," he mumbled. "We've had reports of them getting bolder lately." "It wasn't a damn coyote," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "It was on 2 legs, Mark, running like a man. But it wasn't a man." There was a long pause. "John, how much have you had to drink tonight?" "Nothing. I'm coming home from work and the mall. I know what I saw." Mark sighed. "Look, you probably saw a bear. They can run on their hind legs for short distances, especially if they're young and spooked." "This thing was keeping pace with a deer at full sprint," I insisted, "and it had proportions all wrong for a bear. Arms too long, legs too straight. It moved wrong, Mark." "Well, I don't know what to tell you. Light plays tricks at night. It was probably just—" "It was a Bigfoot," I blurted out, immediately regretting using that word. It sounded so ridiculous, so tabloid, but I didn't know what else to call it. The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought he'd hung up. "John," he finally said, his voice different now, more serious. "I know you're not the type to make stuff up or get carried away with imagination. If you say you saw something unusual, I believe you saw something. But jumping to Bigfoot is a stretch." "I know how it sounds," I said quietly. "I wouldn't believe me either. Look, I'll swing by that stretch of road tomorrow morning on my patrol. If there's anything to see, tracks, hair, whatever, I'll let you know. But don't go telling people you saw Bigfoot, all right? You know how folks around here are. They'll never let you live it down." He was right about that. In a small community like ours, being known as the Bigfoot guy isn't exactly good for your reputation or business. I agreed to keep it between us for now and hung up. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure crossing the road, its movements too quick and purposeful for its size. I kept replaying those 3 seconds, trying to find some detail I'd missed that would explain it away as something normal. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself that maybe Mark was right. Maybe it was just a bear, and the weird light conditions had distorted what I saw. Maybe my tired brain had filled in details that weren't there. Then Mark called around 11 a.m. "I'm out on Pine Valley," he said without preamble. "Where exactly did you see this thing cross?" I described the location as best I could, about a quarter-mile past the old Peterson place, where the road curves around that big oak with the lightning scar. "Yeah, I'm there now." His voice sounded odd, tense. "John, I found tracks." My stomach dropped. "What kind of tracks?" "I don't know," he admitted, which was not something Mark said often about animal signs. "They start where you said something came out of the woods. They're big, too big for a bear, unless it's the largest one I've ever seen, and the stride length is all wrong." "What do you mean?" "They're too far apart. Whatever made these was covering a lot of ground with each step, and the impression pattern is weird, almost like a human footprint, but wider, with what looks like 5 toes. The deer tracks are here too, just like you said." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the March weather. "So you believe me now?" "I believe you saw something unusual," he said carefully. "I'm not saying it's but these aren't tracks I recognize, and I've been doing this job a long time." "What do we do?" I asked. "Nothing for now. I'm going to take some photos and measurements. Maybe make a plaster cast if I can. But John, let's keep this between us for the time being. If I file an official report about unidentified tracks, I'll never hear the end of it." I agreed. But as the day went on, the knowledge of what I'd seen and the confirmation that I hadn't imagined it weighed on me. I went through the motions at my sister's birthday dinner that evening, but my mind was back on that dark stretch of road. Mark came by the next day with the photos and a plaster cast he'd made. The print was huge, almost 16 inches long and incredibly wide across what would be the ball of the foot. The 5-toe impressions were clear, each one ending in what looked like a small claw mark. "I ran this by a buddy of mine at Penn State who studies mammalogy," Mark said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen where my wife was making coffee. "Off the record, of course, he said it doesn't match any known animal in the region. The closest thing would be a bear, but the shape is all wrong." "So what is it?" Mark just shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm going back out there today to look for more sign. If whatever made these is still in the area, there might be hair samples, scat, something that could tell us more." He didn't find anything else that day or the next. By the end of the week, heavy rain had washed away any remaining tracks. Life went on, and gradually the intensity of that night began to fade. Though it never left me completely, I tried to forget about it, tried to focus on normal things like work, family, the upcoming fishing season. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, and more importantly, what it meant. If this thing was real, and the tracks proved something unusual was definitely out there, what else might be real that we dismiss as legend or nonsense? About a month later, I read a small article in the Derry Township Gazette about unusual livestock disturbances on the far side of Pine Valley. A farmer had lost 3 sheep in one night with no typical predator signs. The article quoted him saying, "Whatever did this was big, jumped a 6-foot fence like it wasn't even there." I cut out the article, started keeping a file. When I heard about other weird sightings or incidents in the area, I added them to it. Most could be explained away, Drunk hunters seeing things, teenagers making up stories, but some couldn't. Like the backpacker who swore something followed him for 2 miles on the Pine Valley Trail, always staying just out of sight in the trees. Or the highway worker who found strange hair samples caught on a barbed wire fence that the lab couldn't identify. 6 months after my sighting, I finally worked up the courage to contact a local group called the Pennsylvania Cryptid Research Society. I expected a bunch of kooks, but they were surprisingly normal people. A retired biology teacher, an engineer, a forest ranger. People with credibility who had either seen something themselves or knew someone who had. They took my account seriously, asked intelligent questions, didn't embellish or try to make my experience fit some predetermined narrative. They showed me dozens of similar reports from our county alone, dating back to the 1940s. I've been a member of that group for over 30 years now. We still don't have definitive proof of what people call Bigfoot. No clear photos, no bodies, nothing that would convince a skeptic. But I know what I saw that night on Pine Valley Road. I know the tracks were real. And I know that when I'm in the woods now, I feel watched in a way I never did before March 19th, 1988. I don't go into Pine Valley alone anymore, especially not at night. Something lives in those woods that doesn't fit into the neat categories of animals we recognize. Something intelligent enough to stay hidden for decades, despite the encroachment of development and technology. Sometimes I think about that deer, running for its life. I wonder if it escaped. I wonder if it knew what was chasing it. I wonder if other creatures in those woods live with a constant fear that we comfortable humans have forgotten. It's been 35 years, and I still can't explain what I saw that night. But I'm certain of one thing: it saw me too. And sometimes when I'm driving those back roads late at night and my headlights catch the tree line, I can't shake the feeling that it remembers me as clearly as I remember it. Story 3. I'm still not sure what happened to me that night. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't care if anyone believes me. I know what I saw. Let me start by saying I've lived in Pinewood County my whole life. It's mostly forest and small communities scattered throughout. I've always loved these woods, at least until last year. It was 1987, April 8th to be exact. That date is burned into my memory forever. My name is Max Henderson. I work night shifts at the paper mill about 30 miles from my place. That night I got off early because one of the machines broke down. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I was driving home along Route 16, that narrow stretch that runs through the thick pine forest near Gray Station. I needed a cigarette bad, and I didn't want to smoke in my new car. It was a Ford Taurus I just bought 3 months earlier. I was real proud of that car, kept it clean as a whistle. So I pulled over at this little turnout near Pinewood Ridge, a spot where the trees open up a bit. It's normally peaceful there. I'd stopped many times before without issue. The night was unusually quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just dead silence. I didn't think much of it then, wish I had. I rolled the window down and lit up, listening to some late-night radio show talking about Reagan or something. The moon was almost full, casting enough light that I could see the outlines of the trees without my headlights on. About halfway through my cigarette, I noticed something moving in the tree line about 50 yards away. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get them around here sometimes. But something felt off. The movement was too deliberate, too upright. I leaned forward, squinting to see better in the darkness. Whatever it was big. Really big, and it was moving toward me. My heart started beating faster. I'm not usually jumpy, but something about the way it moved set off every alarm bell in my head. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, it was something else. I reached over and turned my headlights on. Jesus Christ, I still get goosebumps thinking about what I saw. Standing there in my high beams was this thing. It had to be between 9 and 10 feet tall. Not exaggerating. I'm 6'2", and this thing would have towered over me. It was covered in dark hair or fur, not black exactly, more like a deep dark brown. But it wasn't the size that got me, it was the eyes. They caught my headlights and reflected back this bright glowing red. Not like an animal's eyes that just reflect light. These were actually glowing like hot coals. I froze, completely froze. It was standing there, just staring at me. Its arms hung way down, below its knees. Way too long. The proportions were all wrong. And its face, God, I could make out just enough of its face. It wasn't human, not even close, but it wasn't exactly like an ape either. Then it made this sound. A deep rumbling grunt that turned into something like a growl. I could feel it in my chest more than hear it. That's when the smell hit me, like rotten eggs or sulfur, so strong it made my eyes water even through the cigarette smoke. I sat there paralyzed for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. The thing took another step toward me, then another, each step deliberate, its eyes never leaving mine. It was about 30 feet from my car when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I threw my cigarette out the window, slammed the car into drive, and floored it. Gravel sprayed everywhere as my tires struggled for traction. In my rearview mirror, I could see it standing there, those red eyes watching me go. I was doing 80 on a 45 mph road, white-knuckling the steering wheel, certain that at any moment that thing would somehow be right behind me. I didn't stop until I reached Jerry's place. Jerry's been my best friend since high school. He thought I was having a breakdown or something. I must have looked insane, sweating, shaking, barely able to form a coherent sentence. But Jerry knows me. He knows I don't make shit up. "We gotta go back," I told him after I calmed down enough to speak. "Are you out of your mind?" Jerry said. But he grabbed his shotgun anyway and got in the car with me. It took everything I had to drive back there. Every instinct was screaming at me to go home, lock the doors, and never go near Pinewood Ridge again. But I had to know I wasn't crazy. We got there around 3:15 a.m. I kept the car running, headlights on high beam, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The thing was gone, but that smell, that sulfur smell, it was still there, hanging in the air. "You smell that?" I asked Jerry. He nodded, looking unnerved. "Like rotten eggs or something?" We didn't get out of the car, but Jerry saw something I missed, large impressions in the soft ground where I'd seen the thing standing. They weren't clear footprints, just depressions really, but they were huge and spaced far apart. "You believe me now?" I asked him. He didn't answer directly, just said, "Let's get the hell out of here, Max." We drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dobson was there, working late. He'd known me since I was a kid, knew I wasn't the type to cause trouble, but I could see in his eyes he thought I was drunk or on something. "You're saying you saw a Bigfoot?" he asked, not even trying to hide his skepticism. "I don't know what it was," I said, "but it wasn't a bear, and it sure as hell wasn't human." He wrote it down, but didn't do much else. Said he'd look into it. I found out later that there had been other reports, lots of them, all throughout 1987, but the sheriff's department had been keeping it quiet. Didn't want to cause a panic, I guess. After filing the report, I went home, but couldn't sleep. Kept seeing those red eyes whenever I closed mine. The smell of sulfur seemed to follow me, like it had seeped into my clothes or something. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't face driving back through those woods to get to work. Instead, I went to the library. The librarian, Mrs. Patel, knew exactly what I was looking for before I even asked. She'd been helping others research the same thing. See, I wasn't the first in Pinewood County to have an encounter. Throughout early '87, people had been reporting strange things, weird screams in the night, high-pitched wails that didn't sound like any animal native to these parts, pets going missing, dogs freaking out for no reason, and sightings. Not many, but enough to establish a pattern. What really got me was hearing about what happened over at Oak Ridge Mobile Home Community in January. People there reported seeing faces peering into their windows at night. Windows that were over 8 feet off the ground. Mrs. Patel showed me an article from the local paper about a driver who'd seen something on February 1st, also near Grey Station, where I had my encounter. Their description matched what I saw. The height, the walk, the glowing eyes. But they mentioned something I hadn't seen. Fangs. 2 large fangs protruding from the top of its mouth. I felt sick reading that. What the hell was this thing? I spent the rest of the day talking to people around town. Most wouldn't say much, like they were afraid of being laughed at. But a few opened up when I told them about my experience. Tom Gillespie, who runs the gas station on Route 16, told me he'd heard those screams I mentioned while closing up one night. Said it made his skin crawl, like nothing he'd ever heard before. Martha Jenkins, whose property backs up to the forest, showed me where something had torn apart her chicken coop in February. Whatever did it was strong enough to bend metal panels. She lost 12 chickens that night. By evening, I was no closer to understanding what I'd seen, but at least I knew I wasn't crazy or alone. Whatever was in our woods, others had seen it too. I went home as darkness fell, dreading the night ahead. I double-checked all my locks, closed all the blinds, and kept every light in the house on. I tried watching TV to distract myself, but nothing helped. Around midnight, the power went out. Just like that, my whole house went dark. The sudden silence as the refrigerator and air conditioning shut off was deafening. I fumbled for the flashlight I keep in the end table drawer, heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight's beam seemed so small, so inadequate against the darkness. I called the power company from my landline, but the phone was dead too. That's when I heard it. Something moving outside. A heavy shuffling sound circling my house. I stood frozen in my living room, flashlight pointed at the front door, listening to whatever it was making its way around the perimeter of my home. It paused outside my bedroom window. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A deep, rumbling grunt. The same sound I'd heard at Pinewood Ridge. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. I had a hunting rifle in my closet, but it might as well have been in another state. No way was I going near that bedroom window. The thing outside sniffed loudly, like it was trying to catch my scent. Then the window rattled as something pushed against it. Not hard enough to break it. Just testing. I backed away toward the kitchen, trying not to make a sound. The shuffling continued around to the back of the house. I heard my back screen door creak, the one I'd been meaning to fix for months. Heart hammering in my chest, I grabbed a kitchen knife. Fat lot of good it would do against whatever was out there, but it was better than nothing. Then came the smell. That sulfur stench seeping in through the cracks around the doors and windows. It was here, right outside my house. I heard a scratching at the back door, then a low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like an attempt at speech. The doorknob turned slowly, but I'd locked it. Thank God I'd locked it. The scratching moved to the kitchen window. I ducked down behind the counter, knife clutched in my sweating hand, praying it couldn't see me. Something large blotted out what little moonlight was coming through the window. I didn't look up. I couldn't. For what felt like hours, it moved around my house, testing entries, occasionally making those terrible grunting sounds. I stayed hidden in the kitchen, knife ready, flashlight off now to avoid attracting attention. Then, just before dawn, the sound stopped. The sulfur smell lingered, but the presence outside was gone. I stayed put until full daylight, too terrified to move. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, I found large, muddy impressions around my house, the same kind Jerry and I had seen at Pinewood Ridge. And on my back door, 4 deep gouges where something had tried to claw its way in. I called Jerry immediately. He came over with his brother-in-law, who works for the power company. They found the line to my house had been pulled down, not by a storm or a fallen branch, but like something had deliberately yanked it from the connection point. I packed a bag and stayed with Jerry for a week after that. Filed another report with Sheriff Dobson, who seemed less skeptical this time, but still offered no real help. That was 6 months ago. Whatever roamed Pinewood County in early '87 seems to have moved on. The sightings stopped by late summer. The screams aren't heard anymore. But those of us who encountered it, we're changed. I sold my house and moved into an apartment in town. I don't drive at night if I can help it, especially not near Grace Station or Pinewood Ridge. I keep a loaded shotgun beside my bed now. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, certain I can smell sulfur in the air, and feel those red eyes watching me through the window. The rational part of my brain says it was just a bear, or maybe some kind of large cat, distorted by fear and darkness. But I know better. I've talked to the others who saw it. None of us can agree on what it was. Bigfoot? Maybe, but the glowing eyes, the fangs, the smell, that doesn't fit with any Bigfoot story I've ever heard. Whatever walked in front of my car that night wasn't just an undiscovered animal. It was something else, something that knew I was watching it, something that came looking for me after. Even writing this down, my hands are shaking. I can almost smell that sulfur again, like the memory of it brings it back. Sometimes I think about going to one of those TV shows that investigate paranormal stuff, but what would be the point? They just make me look crazy. All I know is that I won't be caught out in those woods after dark ever again. And if you're ever driving through Pinewood County late at night and feel the urge to pull over for a smoke or to stretch your legs, don't. Keep driving. Don't stop until you're far away from here. Because whatever I saw that night, I'm convinced of one thing. It's still out there, waiting. Story 4. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night, May 16th. The date's burned into my memory forever. It's been almost 3 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. Derek says the same thing happens to him. We've talked about it a lot between ourselves, but this is the first time I'm actually putting it out there for others to read. I never believed in any of that cryptid stuff before. Bigfoot, Mothman, whatever. That was all just stories to me. Something for those TV shows where they run around the woods at night with night vision cameras. Derek and I used to laugh at that stuff. Not anymore. We were coming back from a fishing trip that night, driving down Evergreen Back Road near New Alexandria. It was around 11:30 p.m., and we'd stayed out later than planned because the catfish were really biting. I was driving my old F-150, and Derek was half asleep in the passenger seat. We had the radio on low, some classic rock station, and we were maybe 15 minutes from home. Evergreen Back Road isn't exactly a major highway. It's this winding country road that cuts through about 5 miles of dense woods before connecting back to the main routes. Most locals use it as a shortcut, but at night it's dark as hell. No streetlights, just tall pines and oaks on both sides. My headlights were the only light out there, cutting through this tunnel of trees. As we approached Timber Creek Bridge, it's this old single-lane bridge that crosses over a pretty deep creek, I slowed down like I always do. The bridge is narrow, and there's a slight dip before you hit it. That's when Derek suddenly sat upright and pointed. "Sam, what the hell is that?" At first, I thought maybe a deer had wandered onto the road. It happens all the time around here. I eased up on the gas and squinted through the windshield. But this was no deer. Standing right in the middle of the road, directly in our path, maybe 30 feet ahead, was something. Something big. My headlights illuminated it clearly, and I felt this immediate rush of confusion and fear. The thing was massive, had to be at least 7 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs like a man, but it wasn't a man. Its body was covered in dark fur, looked black, or maybe very dark brown in my headlights. The torso was huge, like a barrel, way wider than any human I've ever seen. Its arms hung down past its knees, just hanging there, unnaturally long. But it was the eyes that really got to me. They caught the reflection of my headlights and glowed back at us with this reddish shine, like a deer's eyes at night, but red instead of white and much bigger. Holy shit! Derek whispered. "Sam, what the fuck is that thing?" I was frozen with my hands tight on the wheel. We were completely stopped now, engine idling about 20 feet from this creature. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring at us. I've encountered black bears before while hunting, and there's something in their eyes. An intelligence, but definitely animal. This thing's stare felt different, more aware, almost challenging. "Maybe it's a guy in a costume," I said, not believing it myself. "Some asshole playing a prank." Derek didn't respond to that. We both knew better. No costume could look that real, and nobody would be out here at this hour in the middle of nowhere just waiting for a random car to come by. For what felt like forever, we just sat there in a bizarre standoff with this thing. The only sounds were our breathing and the low rumble of my truck's engine. I flashed my high beams, thinking maybe it would scare it away like it would with a deer. The creature didn't even flinch, just kept staring at us with those glowing red eyes. "We can't sit here all night," Derek finally said. His voice was shaky. "We can't exactly drive around it either," I replied. The road was narrow with steep ditches on both sides. "Honk the horn," he suggested. I gave the horn a short blast. The creature's head tilted slightly, but it didn't move from its spot. I laid on it longer this time. Nothing. It was like it was deliberately blocking our path. That's when I remembered the .22 rifle behind the seat. We'd brought it along on our fishing trip for snakes. Water moccasins can be a problem near the creek where we fish. I reached back and pulled it out. "What are you doing?" Derek asked, his eyes wide. "I'm not going to shoot it," I assured him. "Just scare it off." I rolled down my window and aimed the rifle up, well above the creature's head. I fired once. The crack of the shot echoed through the trees. The creature didn't even flinch. It was like it knew I wasn't aiming at it. "Jesus Christ," Derek muttered. I fired a second shot, again over its head. This time, the creature's head tilted up slightly, following the trajectory of the bullet. Then slowly, almost casually, it turned and began walking toward the tree line on the right side of the road. Its gait was strange, fluid, but not quite human, with a slight roll to each step. Its arms barely swung as it moved, hanging long at its sides. We watched in stunned silence as it disappeared into the darkness of the woods. Even after it was gone, we sat there for maybe another 5 minutes, neither of us wanting to drive forward. "Did we just see what I think we saw?" Derek finally asked. My mouth was dry. "I don't know what the hell that was." Eventually, I put the truck in drive and inched forward. As we crossed Timber Creek Bridge, both of us were scanning the woods on either side, half expecting the creature to come charging out at us. Nothing happened, but that ride home was the longest 15 minutes of my life. We didn't talk much that night. What was there to say? We'd both seen it, plain as day in my headlights. It wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a guy in a suit. It was something else entirely. The next morning, I called Derek around 9 a.m. Neither of us had slept well. We agreed to report what we'd seen to the local authorities, not because we thought they could do anything, but because we felt someone should know. The sheriff's deputy who took our statement, Officer Ramirez, was surprisingly non-judgmental. She wrote everything down carefully, asking clarifying questions about the height, build, and movement of what we'd seen. "You're actually not the first to report something like this," she said after we finished. Derek and I exchanged surprised looks. "There've been 3 other sightings in that same area over the past couple months," she explained. "Timber Valley and the surrounding woods. 2 hikers in March saw something similar crossing the trail about a mile from Timber Creek. In April, a woman driving home from her late shift swears something tall and hairy ran alongside her car for about 30 seconds before veering off into the woods. And just last week, a teenager taking night photos for a school project caught what he thinks was a large, upright figure in the background of one of his shots. She showed us the photo on her computer. It was blurry and dark, taken in the woods at night. but there was definitely something large standing between two distant trees. Something that didn't look human. We thought it might be a bear at first, she continued, but the descriptions don't match. Bears don't stand upright for that long, and they don't have the proportions you're describing. She told us she'd send a couple of rangers out to check the area, especially around the bridge where we'd had our encounter. We gave her our contact information and left, feeling strangely validated, but no less disturbed. That afternoon, we went back to Timber Creek Bridge. I know that sounds crazy, but we had to see it in daylight, had to reassure ourselves that the place was normal. Derek brought his camera, thinking maybe we'd find tracks or some evidence. The bridge looked ordinary enough in the sunlight. Birds were singing. A slight breeze rustled the trees. It was hard to connect this peaceful scene with what we'd experienced just hours earlier. We parked in the same spot where we'd stopped the night before and got out of the truck. The air felt different somehow, heavier. Maybe it was just our imagination, but I swear there was a tension in those woods, like the trees themselves were watching us. This is exactly where it was standing, Derek said, walking to a spot in the middle of the road. He knelt down, examining the asphalt. Sam, come look at this. I joined him. There, on the weathered asphalt, were what looked like partial footprints, huge ones, at least 16 inches long. They were faint, just dusty outlines really, but unmistakably foot-shaped with 5-toe impressions at the front. They were much too large to be human. Holy shit, I whispered. We followed the direction the creature had taken into the woods. The ground there was softer and the tracks were clearer, deep impressions in the dirt that led about 20 yards into the forest before disappearing where the ground became rocky. Derek took photos of everything. We were still examining the area when 2 forest rangers pulled up in their truck. They introduced themselves as Rangers Cooper and Benson. Ramirez had sent them to check out our report. Find something? Ranger Cooper asked, noticing us looking at the ground. We showed them the tracks. They took measurements and photos of their own, looking increasingly puzzled. These don't match any wildlife indigenous to this region, Ranger Benson said after a while. Black bear tracks are wider, with claw marks extending from the toes. These are almost primate-like. But primates don't have feet this large, Cooper added. Not even gorillas. They asked us more questions about what we'd seen, jotting notes in their little books. I could tell they were taking this seriously, which only made the whole situation feel more real and more terrifying. Before they left, Ranger Cooper pulled me aside. Mr. Jackson, I've been working these woods for 17 years. I know every animal that lives here. What you're describing, it doesn't exist according to any wildlife manual. But that doesn't mean it's not out there. He handed me his card. If you see it again, call me directly, day or night. After the rangers left, Derek and I stayed a little longer, taking our own photos and measurements. Neither of us said it out loud, but I know we were both hoping for another glimpse of the creature, and simultaneously terrified we might actually get one. It's been nearly 3 months now, and we haven't seen it again. We've been back to Timber Creek several times during daylight hours. We even went once at dusk, though neither of us had the courage to stay after dark. Nothing. No tracks, no sightings, nothing. But here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about those eyes. The intelligence behind them. This wasn't just some animal. There was something knowing in that stare, like it was sizing us up, making decisions. Derek and I haven't told many people. His wife knows, and my brother. That's it. Who would believe us anyway? Before this happened, I would have laughed at anyone telling me they saw Bigfoot in the Pennsylvania woods. Now I don't know what to believe. I still drive that road sometimes, usually in broad daylight. I always slow down at Timber Creek Bridge, always scan the trees. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know if it's still out there, watching from the shadows of Timber Valley. But I do know this. Something impossible stood in front of my truck that night. Something that shouldn't exist made its presence known to us. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and the road ahead disappears into darkness, I can't help but wonder if it's out there, waiting. Maybe next time it won't simply walk away. Story 5. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post something like this. I've always been practical, just a regular construction worker who likes football, fishing, and having a few beers with friends. Nothing extraordinary. But what happened on January 2nd has been eating at me for weeks now, and I need to get it off my chest. My name's Thomas Morgan. I work construction with my buddy Ryan Wilson in western Pennsylvania. We've been on this project in Hempfield Township, just outside of Greensburg, for about 3 months now. It's rural out there, lots of open fields, scattered farms and woods. The kind of peaceful countryside most people only see in pictures. That day started like any other. It was cold as hell, ground partially frozen, breathmaking clouds in front of our faces. We got to the site around 7 a.m., both of us complaining about having to be back at work right after New Year's. The project was a new storage facility, nothing exciting, just concrete foundation work that day. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, we were taking a short break, drinking some coffee from our thermoses to warm up. The sun was actually out, which was nice for January in Pennsylvania. I remember checking my watch because we were discussing how much more we could get done before it got dark. I was leaning against our truck when something caught my eye on a hill near Oakwood Farm, maybe half a mile away. At first, I thought it was just a couple of people walking, probably the farmers who owned the property. "Hey, Ryan," I said, nodding toward the hill. "You see those guys over there?" Ryan squinted and raised his hand to shield his eyes from the sun. "Yeah, what about them?" Something felt off about what we were seeing, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "I don't know. Something weird about the way they're moving." We both stood there watching as these two figures walked along the crest of the hill. They were tall, really tall, but from that distance it was hard to judge exactly how big. What struck me as strange was how they moved, deliberate, almost cautious. They had this strange, hunched-over posture, not like someone with back problems, but like their natural way of walking. "Those don't look like the Oakwood farmers," Ryan said after a minute. We kept watching as they moved down the hill and into a field across the road from us. That's when things got clearer and weirder. The sun was at an angle where it silhouetted them against the skyline, and I felt my skin go cold despite the coffee I'd just finished. These weren't people. At least, they weren't like any people I'd ever seen. They were black. Not like African American, but completely black, like shadows with mass. Their shoulders were impossibly broad, their arms hanging down much longer than they should have been. And they were huge. From that distance, they should have looked tiny, but they didn't. They dominated the landscape. "What the fuck are those?" Ryan whispered. I couldn't answer him. My throat had gone completely dry. We stood frozen, watching. I thought about grabbing my phone to take a video, but honestly I couldn't move. It was like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing, so my body just shut down. Then one of them, the one slightly ahead, suddenly veered away from its companion. It moved with purpose, bending down toward something on the ground. When it straightened up, it was holding something large over its shoulder. It took me a few seconds to process what I was seeing. "Is that a deer?" Ryan's voice cracked. It sure as hell looked like it. The thing had just casually picked up what appeared to be a deer carcass and slung it over its shoulder like it weighed nothing. A full-grown deer, one-handed. The creature rejoined its partner, and they continued walking, heading toward Hempfield Woods about 200 yards away. They weren't running or even moving particularly fast, but their strides were so long they covered ground quickly. Within minutes they'd reached the tree line and disappeared into the woods. The entire time neither of us spoke. We just stood there, coffee forgotten in our hands, watching these things walk across the landscape as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Did we just see what I think we saw? Ryan finally broke the silence. I nodded, still staring at the spot where they'd vanished into the trees. Yeah, I think we did. About 15 minutes later, I know the time because I kept checking my watch, as if somehow that would anchor me to reality, we noticed movement from the direction of Oakwood Farm. 2 farmers, the actual owners, had come out with a tractor. They were hitching a flail to it, probably getting ready to clear some field debris. That's when it really hit me how big those creatures had been. We watched the farmers work, moving the tractor with its 9-foot-high flail chute into the same general area where we'd seen the creatures. Compared to the farmers, who looked tiny from our vantage point, those things must have been enormous. Ryan, I said slowly, using that flail as reference, those things had to be at least 12 feet tall. Ryan swallowed hard. And at least twice as broad as a normal man. We both fell silent again, trying to process what we'd seen. Part of me wanted to run to my truck and get the hell out of there, but another part, the part that needs to understand things, wanted to investigate. We should go look, I said after a while. Ryan looked at me like I was insane. Look for what? Bigfoot? Are you crazy? Not for them, I clarified. Just where they were. Maybe there's tracks or something. It took some convincing, but finally Ryan agreed. We told ourselves we were being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation for what we'd seen. Maybe it was some hunters in weird gear. Maybe it was a strange light effect. Maybe we'd both simultaneously lost our minds. We drove the truck over to the access road nearest to where we'd seen them cross. The whole time, I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting to see those figures emerge again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The field was partially frozen hard in some spots and muddy in others. We walked carefully, following the path we'd seen them take. About halfway across, we found what we were looking for, and what I was hoping we wouldn't find. There were marks in the softer patches of ground, not clear footprints. The ground was too hard for that, but definite scuff marks where something heavy had pressed down and disturbed the frost layer. The spacing between them was huge, easily 7 or 8 feet apart, and they led directly toward the woods. "That's a hell of a stride," Ryan murmured, measuring the distance with his own steps. It took him almost 3 full steps to cover the distance between each mark. We followed the trail to the edge of Hempfield Woods, but stopped there. Something about those dark trees made my skin crawl. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky, and the shadows were lengthening. There was no way in hell I was going into those woods. "We should tell someone," Ryan said as we walked back to the truck. "Like who? The police?" "Excuse me, officer, we'd like to report a Bigfoot sighting. They'll think we're nuts or drunk." "Then who?" I didn't have an answer. We drove back to the construction site in silence, finished up what little work we could concentrate on, and called it a day early. The whole drive home, I kept replaying what we'd seen in my head, trying to make sense of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those figures silhouetted against the sky, watching that casual, horrifying moment when one of them picked up what had to be a 150-pound deer with one hand. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that we'd seen something ordinary and misinterpreted it. But I knew better. So did Ryan. The next morning, we met at the job site earlier than usual. Neither of us had slept much. We agreed to go back to the spot once more in daylight to see if the marks were still there. They were, though less distinct after a light overnight frost. "We need to document this," Ryan said, pulling out his phone. He took photos of the scuff marks and the general area. I did the same. Later that day, Ryan found a website where people report unusual sightings. He was adamant that we should submit what we saw. I was reluctant at first, worried about ridicule, about people thinking we were crazy or attention-seeking, but eventually agreed. We filed a detailed report, including the exact location, time of day, and our estimates of the creature's size based on comparing them to the farmers and their equipment. We included the photos of the marks in the field, though they honestly didn't show much, just some disturbed dirt that could have been anything. A week later, a guy who called himself a field researcher contacted us. He drove up from Pittsburgh to interview us and look at the site. He seemed excited by our story, especially the detail about the deer. Apparently, most encounters happen in poor lighting or at great distances where details are fuzzy. The fact that we'd seen them in broad daylight for several minutes moving across open terrain made our sighting unusual. The researcher brought topographic maps and had us mark exactly where we'd been standing and the creature's path. He measured distances, took soil samples from where the scuff marks had been, and scoured the area for hair or other evidence. He didn't find much, but he did confirm that the stride length we described was consistent with other reports he'd investigated. Word got around locally. Some people believed us, most didn't. A reporter from the Greensburg Tribune-Review called, asking for an interview, but we declined. The whole thing was already uncomfortable enough. What bothers me most isn't the ridicule or the questions, it's the not knowing. What were those things? Where did they come from? How many more are out there? And most importantly, why haven't more people seen them? Ryan and I still work construction together. We don't talk about that day much anymore, but sometimes, when we're alone at a job site, one of us will scan the horizon, looking for tall, dark figures. I've started carrying a better camera in my truck, just in case. I know what I saw on January 2nd. 2 creatures, at least 12 feet tall, with unnaturally long arms and broad shoulders, walking across an open field in rural Pennsylvania in broad daylight. One of them picked up a deer carcass like it was a bag of groceries. They moved with intelligence and purpose. They were real. And the scariest part? I've been back to that spot a few times since then, alone, just sitting in my truck, watching the tree line of Hempfield Woods. Last week, just as dusk was falling, I swear I saw movement among the trees, something large shifting in the shadows. I didn't wait around to confirm what it was. I started my truck and got out of there as fast as I could. I don't know if they saw us that day. I don't know if they remember the 2 tiny humans watching them from a distance. But I can't shake the feeling that while we were observing them, they were aware of us too. And sometimes, driving home late from work, passing those dark woods, I can't help but wonder if something is watching me from the trees. Something that could cross the distance between us in just a few enormous strides. I don't work late in Hempfield Township anymore, and neither does Ryan. Story 6. I've been living in rural Pennsylvania all my life, worked our family farm since I was old enough to walk, and I've never been the type to believe in monsters or crazy stories. But what happened to us back in '88 changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. Let me start by saying that summer was different. Everyone around Chestnut Ridge was talking about strange things happening, not just the usual tall tales people tell after too many beers at Denny's Tavern downtown. Real people, folks I've known my whole life, were seeing something in the woods, something big. My husband Frank and I own a small horse farm at the base of Chestnut Ridge, right between Derry and Latrobe. Been in the family for 3 generations, nothing fancy, just honest work with the land. We had 6 horses back then, some chickens and a couple of goats. Our nearest neighbor was about half a mile down the dirt road. It was Sunday, June 26th. I remember because we'd gone to my sister's place in Pittsburgh for the weekend to celebrate my nephew's birthday. We got home around 4:30 that afternoon, and I knew something was wrong before we even pulled into the driveway. The horses were all gathered at the far corner of the pasture, huddled together. They're usually spread out grazing this time of day, especially with the summer grass being so good. Frank noticed it too. "Elizabeth, did Sarah come by to feed them like she was supposed to?" he asked, mentioning our neighbor who watched the place when we were gone. "She should have," I said. "I talked to her yesterday and everything was fine." As we got closer to the house, the dogs started acting weird too. We had 2 German shepherds back then, Buck and Lady. Usually, they'd be barking their heads off, happy to see us. But that day, they were whining, tails between their legs, pawing at the truck doors, desperate to get in rather than out. Frank let them in the cab with us, and they crawled right into my lap, all 80 pounds of them, shaking. "Something's got them spooked," Frank said quietly. We parked, and I had to practically drag the dogs out of the truck. They kept looking toward the tree line, hackles raised. That's when Frank noticed the floodlight. We had this big security light mounted on the corner of the barn, about 6 feet up. It was completely torn off, not unscrewed or fallen down, but ripped clean out of its socket. Wires were dangling, and the fixture itself was nowhere to be seen. What the hell could have done that, I remember asking. The light was metal, sturdy. You'd need tools to remove it properly. Frank didn't answer. He was looking at the ground. "Liz, come here." I walked over, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Huge footprints circling the entire house and barn. They were pressed deep into the soil, much deeper than any human would make. They measured, I know because Frank took a tape measure to them right away, 16 inches long and about 10 inches wide. The ground was pretty dry, so we couldn't make out toes or anything detailed, but they were definitely feet, 2-legged, walking upright, bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Frank followed the tracks, and they led from the woods, around our property, and back into the dense forest that covers most of Chestnut Ridge. By the tire tracks in our driveway, whatever made these prints had been there while we were gone. We spent the rest of that evening trying to calm the animals. The horses wouldn't come to the barn. We had to bring their feed out to the pasture. The chickens were so agitated they weren't roosting properly. Even the goats, who usually aren't afraid of anything, were bleating nervously. That night, neither of us slept much. Every sound from outside had us both wide awake. The dogs refused to leave the bedroom, something they never did. "Maybe it was a bear," I suggested, though I knew better. "Bears don't walk on 2 legs for that distance, and they sure don't rip out light fixtures." "No bear," Frank said quietly. "Those prints weren't bear prints." That's when he told me about Tom Lester and the Miller family a few miles over, who'd both reported seeing something huge walking through their fields just last week. I'd heard the rumors around town, of course, but hadn't paid them much mind. People see things in these woods all the time. Usually turns out to be a deer or someone's livestock got loose. But those footprints were real. Whatever had been walking around our house wasn't anything I'd ever encountered in these woods before. 3 days went by, and things started to feel almost normal again. The animals were still on edge, but we were all settling back into routine. I convinced myself it was probably some kind of prank, maybe teenagers from town. The footprints could have been made with some kind of big fake feet. That had to be it. Then came Wednesday morning, June 29th. I'm always up early for chores. That morning I was in the kitchen making coffee around 7 a.m., still in my robe. Frank had already headed out to the back field to fix a section of fence that needed repair. The sun was just starting to really light up the place. It was one of those clear summer mornings where everything looks especially green and bright. I was staring out the kitchen window, which faces the horse paddock and the edge of the woods beyond, when I heard a strange sound. It wasn't loud, just different, like something heavy sliding through the tall grass along our fence line. That's when I saw it. About 70 yards from the house, walking along the fence line separating our paddock from the forest edge, was something I still have trouble describing all these years later. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall, and covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair, kind of matted in places, a greyish-brown colour that caught the morning sunlight. It was walking upright on 2 legs, taking these long, deliberate strides. Its arms were what struck me most. They hung way down, much longer than a person's arms should be, almost to its knees. I couldn't make out a face. It had what looked like a head sitting directly on its shoulders, no real neck that I could see. No visible waist either, just this big, solid torso. I froze, just completely froze. It was moving away from me, following our fence line toward the north pasture where Frank was working. My first thought was Frank. I needed to warn him. I tried to yell, but nothing came out. My second thought was evidence. No one would believe this. The camera. We kept a Polaroid on the shelf by the back door for taking pictures of new foals and farm projects. I forced myself to move, grabbed the camera, and ran back to the window. It was still there, moving slowly but steadily. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely frame the shot. I snapped a picture. The creature paused like it heard the sound of the camera. Then I took another, and a third. It turned then, not its head, but its whole upper body, and seemed to look directly at the house, at me. Even from that distance, I felt something pass between us, a kind of awareness. It knew I was watching it. Then it simply turned and walked into the tree line, disappearing within seconds despite its size. The photos. I pulled them from the camera, waiting those agonizing minutes for them to develop. But something was wrong. The first one showed nothing but a dark smudge where the creature should have been. The second and third were even worse, just grey, like the film had been exposed to light before I took the picture. That camera had never malfunctioned before, and never did again afterward. I ran outside screaming for Frank. He came running from the back field, shotgun in hand. He'd taken to carrying it with him since finding those footprints. "It was here," I told him, pointing towards the tree line. "Right there, walking along the fence. Frank, it was real." We searched for tracks and found them. The same massive footprints, this time in the dewy morning grass. They led exactly where I'd seen the creature walking, and then into the woods. Frank wanted to follow them, but I begged him not to. Whatever this thing was, it was bigger and stronger than us. The way it had ripped that floodlight out like it was nothing. I was terrified of what it might do if cornered. We called the police, but I could tell they didn't believe us. They took a report, glanced at the footprints without much interest, and suggested maybe it was someone playing a prank. One officer even had the nerve to ask if we'd been drinking, but news travels fast in small towns. By that afternoon, 3 neighboring farms had called to tell us they'd seen something similar in the past week. The Martins, about 2 miles east, had lost several chickens. The Wilsons had their shed broken into, though nothing seemed to be taken. And old Mr. Peterson, who lived alone up the ridge, claimed something had been on his roof the previous night. Our horses stayed bunched together in the middle of the field for days after that. They refused to go near the fence line where I'd seen the creature. Animals know things we don't, and they were telling us to be afraid. Over the next few weeks, the sightings continued all around Chestnut Ridge. The local paper even ran a small story about the Bigfoot flap in Westmoreland County. Some people laughed it off, but those of us who'd seen something weren't laughing. I kept the camera loaded and by the window for the rest of that summer. Frank installed more lights around the property and reinforced the barn doors. We started bringing the horses in every night, no matter how hot it got. It never came that close to our house again, at least not that we saw. But through July and August, we'd hear strange noises at night. Not animal sounds, not human sounds either. Just different. Wood knocking against wood. Low, rumbling grunts that carried across the fields. Once, in early August, we found a half-eaten deer carcass at the edge of our property. It wasn't killed by coyotes or bears. The way it was torn apart was unlike anything the local game warden had seen before. By the time fall came, the sightings around the ridge had mostly stopped. Life went back to normal, or some version of it. But I've never felt completely safe in these woods since then. People ask me why we didn't move away. This land has been in Frank's family for generations. It's our home. Whatever that thing was, it was just passing through. At least that's what we tell ourselves. I've thought about that morning thousands of times since then. About what I saw walking along our fence in the clear morning light. About how the camera failed at the exact moment I needed it to work. About the look we exchanged across the field, because it did look at me, I'm certain of it. And in that moment, I knew it was intelligent. To this day, I can't explain what happened to those photographs or what exactly was living in the woods around Chestnut Ridge in the summer of '88. All I know is what I saw with my own eyes, and no one can convince me otherwise. Every time I look out at those trees from my kitchen window, especially in the early morning light, a part of me is still looking for it, wondering if it's out there, watching us the way I watched it that day. Story 7. See, T, I've been sitting on this for almost 2 months now, but I need to get it out there. I've lived on my farm in Fayette County all my life, a quiet place outside of Cornellsville where nothing much happens. Until recently, that is. I'm not one for making up stories or seeking attention. Anyone around here will tell you Jacob Miller keeps to himself and minds his own business. I've worked this land since I took it over from my father nearly 30 years ago, and I know every inch of these 120 acres like the back of my hand. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. It started with the screaming. I was in the barn finishing up some late repairs on the tractor when I first heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't like a fox or a bobcat, which can make some pretty unsettling noises if you're not used to them. No. This was different, higher-pitched, longer, with a sort of warbling quality that reminded me of a person in pain, but not quite human either. My dogs, I've got 3 of them, 2 German shepherds named Duke and Ranger, and an old mixed breed called Sadie. They all started going crazy. Duke and Ranger were barking and snarling, hair standing up on their backs, while old Sadie just trembled and whined, trying to push herself behind my legs. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, standard procedure out here when investigating something unusual, and stepped outside. The screaming had stopped, but the dogs were still on high alert. I scanned the edge of the woods with my light, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Probably just a mountain lion passing through, I told myself, though I knew damn well it wasn't. We haven't had a confirmed mountain lion in these parts for decades. The next few nights, the screaming continued. Always after dark, always from different directions, like whatever was making the sound was circling the property. My dogs refused to go outside after sunset, something that had never happened before. Duke, who's normally fearless, would stand at the door whimpering when I tried to take him out for his evening bathroom break. Then came what I've been referring to as the sighting, April 23rd. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd just gotten off the phone with her when it happened. The sun was setting, that dusky half-light when the world turns grey, and shadows stretch long across the fields. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sky turn pink and orange over the ridge. The dogs were inside. They hadn't wanted to come out with me. Movement caught my eye at the tree line. Something large emerged from the woods about 200 yards from the house. At first, I thought it might be a bear. We get black bears around here occasionally. But as it moved into the clearing, I could tell this was no bear. It walked upright, on 2 legs. Tall, I'd estimate at least 7 feet, covered in light brown hair or fur that seemed to catch the last rays of sunlight. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, legs slightly bent but powerful looking. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips, as this creature walked with purpose across the road that cuts through the edge of my property. Its stride was smooth, confident, covering ground quickly without seeming to hurry. What happened next still makes my mouth go dry when I think about it. The thing approached the fence that separates my east field from the road, a 5-foot-high fence that I'd installed myself last year. Without breaking stride, it simply stepped over it. Not climbed, not jumped, stepped over, like you or I might step over a garden hose. I've replayed that moment in my mind 1,000 times. No human could make that movement. The fence comes up to my chest, and I'm 6 feet tall. This thing just lifted its leg and stepped over like it was nothing. It crossed about 50 yards of open field before disappearing into the woods on the other side. The whole encounter lasted maybe 45 seconds, but it felt like time had stretched somehow. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. What was I supposed to say? That I saw Bigfoot? I'm not some attention seeker or conspiracy nut. I'm a practical man who deals in facts. But what I saw was real, and it shook me to my core. A few nights later, April 26th, everything escalated. I'd been on edge since the sighting, keeping the dogs close, making sure all the outbuildings were locked up tight at night. I'd even taken to carrying my sidearm when doing evening chores, something I hadn't done in years. It was about 9:15 in the evening. The sky was clear, stars bright overhead. I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, Duke and Ranger at my feet, while Sadie dozed on her bed nearby. The night was normal. Frogs croaking down by the pond, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then I noticed something in the sky behind Fayette Mountain, a cluster of red lights, maybe 5 or 6 of them, moving in a tight formation. At first I thought it was a plane, but there was something off about it. The lights didn't blink like aircraft lights do, and they moved with a kind of intentionality that's hard to describe. I stood up, squinting to get a better look, when suddenly there was a flash, bright, brilliant white-blue light that lit up the whole horizon behind the mountain. It was so intense that for a second the trees on the ridgeline were silhouetted in sharp relief against the sky. My first thought was that a plane had crashed or exploded, and I listened for the impact. Nothing came, no sound at all, which was strange for such a bright flash, and then I noticed something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night had gone completely silent. The frogs, the crickets, the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush, all of it just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing. One moment the night was alive with sound, the next, nothing. The silence felt physical, like pressure against my eardrums. The dogs noticed it too. They'd gotten to their feet when the flash occurred, but now they were frozen, heads up, ears perked. Even old Sadie was alert, her rheumy eyes wide and focused on something in the distance. None of them made a sound, no barking, no growling, not even a whimper. I've lived in these woods my entire life, and I've never experienced anything like that silence. It was wrong in a way I can't fully explain, like the natural world was holding its breath. I remember checking my watch, 9:23 p.m. The silence lasted for nearly 7 minutes by my count. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods to the north of my property, came that screaming sound again. But this time it was different, more urgent, almost frantic. It rose and fell in pitch, echoing through the trees. The dogs broke their trance. Duke and Ranger started barking wildly, running to the edge of the porch, and then back to me, clearly agitated but unwilling to venture into the yard. Sadie just crawled under my chair, trembling so hard I could feel the vibration through the floorboards. That's when I saw it, or them. At the edge of my property, where my cleared land meets the forest, shapes were moving. In the darkness, I couldn't make out details, but I could see movement. Tall, dark silhouettes shifting between the trees, at least 3 of them. I reached for my shotgun, which I'd propped against the wall beside me, but something stopped me. A feeling, no, a certainty, that showing aggression would be a terrible mistake. The screaming sound came again, closer this time, and was answered by another call from a different direction. The shapes at the edge of the woods seemed to be communicating, moving with purpose. I don't mind admitting I was terrified. My mouth had gone dry, and my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Whatever these things were, they weren't wildlife I was familiar with, and they weren't people either. Then came the light again. Not a flash this time, but a soft blue-white glow emanating from the trees where the shapes were moving. It pulsed gently, illuminating the area just enough for me to catch glimpses of tall, hair-covered forms, moving with that same fluid grace I'd witnessed days earlier. The dogs went berserk. Duke actually broke away from me and charged down the porch steps, barking furiously as he raced toward the light. I called after him, but he was beyond listening. Ranger followed a moment later, despite my attempts to grab his collar. The blue light intensified suddenly, becoming almost painfully bright. I shielded my eyes, calling desperately for my dogs. When I looked again, the light was gone. So were Duke and Ranger. I called for them for hours, searching my property with a flashlight, but they were simply gone. No barking, no howling, nothing. Just Sadie remained, curled up on the kitchen floor, refusing to move or even eat. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat up with my shotgun across my lap, jumping at every sound. But the strange thing was, there weren't many sounds to jump at. The woods remained unnaturally quiet until dawn, when birds finally began their morning songs, as if nothing had happened. I called the sheriff's office the next morning. Deputy Willis came out, took my statement, had a look around. He was polite but skeptical, asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't beyond that one beer. Suggested the dogs had probably chased a deer and would come home when they got hungry. Said the lights might have been a meteor or military aircraft from the base over in Greene County. I didn't push it. What was the point? I knew what I'd seen. Wildlife officials came out 2 days later after I mentioned the strange animal sounds. They found some odd tracks at the edge of the woods, large, human-like prints that they attributed to possibly a bear walking on its hind legs. They promised to set up some trail cameras, but seemed more concerned about whether I'd been leaving food out that might attract wildlife. Duke and Ranger never came back. It's been almost 2 months now. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear barking in the distance, but when I go outside to listen, that unnatural silence falls again. Sadie won't go outside alone anymore. I have to carry her. And even then, she does her business quickly and scurries back to the door. She sleeps in my room now, whimpering in her dreams. A few of my neighbors have reported similar experiences: strange lights, unusual sounds, livestock acting skittish. Old Bill Harper, whose farm backs up to mine on the north side, said he found his cattle all clustered in one corner of their field one morning, refusing to move even when he brought feed. Said they stayed that way for 2 days. I've lived on Ridgeview Farm my entire life. I know these woods, these fields, this sky. What happened here in late April wasn't natural, and it wasn't normal. I don't have explanations. I'm not claiming it was aliens or Bigfoot or whatever else people might jump to. All I know is that something came to my property, something that moved like a man but wasn't a man, something that could step over a 5-foot fence without breaking stride. Something that made the entire natural world go silent with its presence. And sometimes, when I'm out in the fields working, I feel like I'm being watched. Like whatever visited that night is still here, observing, waiting. For what? I don't know. I haven't seen the red lights again, or the blue glow in the trees. But last week, I found something caught on the fence where the creature crossed back in April. A tuft of light brown hair, coarse and thick, like nothing I've ever seen before. I've got it in a plastic bag in my desk drawer. I don't know what to do with it. Who would believe me? So I'm putting this out there for what it's worth. If anyone else in Fayette County or the surrounding areas has experienced anything similar, I'd like to know I'm not losing my mind. And if you're planning on hiking in the woods near Cornelsville, maybe reconsider. Or at least, don't go after dark. Because whatever's out there, it knows we're here. And I don't think it's just passing through. Story 8. I still can't believe it's been 24 years since that camping trip. I've been an outdoorsman my whole life. But what happened that summer in '99 still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I've never shared this story publicly before because, honestly, I know how it sounds. But I need to get this off my chest. It was the summer after my junior year of high school. Me and my 2 best friends, Jake and Chris, had been planning our first real wilderness adventure for months. We'd been camping plenty of times before, but always at designated campgrounds with bathrooms and other people around. This was going to be different. The Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota, completely off the grid. We'd saved up from our crappy summer jobs to buy all the gear we needed: lightweight tent, portable stove, water purifiers, the works. Jake's dad let us borrow his old Chevy S10 pickup, which we somehow managed to cram full with our gear and a rented canoe strapped to the top. Looking back, we probably looked ridiculous with that tiny truck loaded down like that. But we felt like real adventurers. The drive up the Gunflint Trail was amazing. Living in southern Minnesota, I'd never seen wilderness so dense and untouched. We checked in at the ranger station, got our permits, and listened to the safety lecture with the kind of half-attention typical of 16-year-old boys who think they know everything. The ranger specifically warned us about proper food storage to avoid bear encounters. I remember nodding along, thinking I knew everything about black bears from the camping I'd done with my family. We put in at Large Creek access point around noon. The first day was tough. None of us had much experience with canoes, and the portages between lakes kicked our asses. We were carrying way too much unnecessary stuff. Typical rookie mistake. By nightfall, we'd only made it about halfway to our planned destination, so we set up camp on a small island on the first decent site we could find. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Wake up at dawn, eat breakfast, break camp, paddle and portage until mid-afternoon. Set up the new camp, fish for dinner, sit around the fire telling stupid jokes and talking about girls from school. Classic teenage stuff. We got better at canoeing and portaging, and by the fourth day, we were deep into the wilderness, further than we had originally planned. That's when it happened. We'd found an amazing campsite on a small peninsula jutting into a crystal-clear lake. The site was elevated with a great view, and we could see stars like I've never seen before or since. No light pollution at all. The moon was nearly full that night, casting this silvery light over everything. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to pee. I didn't want to wake up Jake and Chris by rummaging around for my flashlight, and honestly, I didn't think I needed it. The moonlight was so bright I could see pretty well. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and stepped outside. Our campsite had a clear area around the tent, then a ring of brush and trees before the shoreline. I walked about 30 feet from the tent toward a cluster of what looked like rocks. I was half asleep, not paying much attention, just wanting to do my business and get back to my sleeping bag. I started to pee on what I thought was a large rock. For a split second, everything seemed normal. Then the rock made a sound, this disgusted grunt that was unmistakably annoyed and human-like. Before I could process what was happening, this thing moved from a belly-crawl position to standing upright in one fluid motion. It happened so fast I barely saw it, just this dark silhouette suddenly rising up and then darting away into the trees. My first thought was, holy shit, I just peed on a bear cub. Pure terror shot through me as I imagined a mother bear charging out of the darkness. I've seen black bears before while camping with my dad in Wisconsin. They usually run away unless they feel threatened, or you get between them and their cubs. And here I was, having just pissed on what might be a cub. I didn't even take time to zip up properly. I just ran back to the tent, practically diving through the entrance and landing on top of Jake and Chris. They woke up cursing at me, but shut up quickly when they saw my face. Later, Chris told me I was white as a sheet, and my eyes were watering from the adrenaline. "Dude, what the hell?" Jake whispered. "There's something out there," I whispered back, my voice shaking. "I think I peed on a bear cub." Under normal circumstances, they probably would have laughed their asses off, but they could tell I was seriously freaked out. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, listening. That's when we heard it. Something was moving around our campsite, not making a ton of noise, but definitely there. Twigs snapping, brush rustling. It circled our tent twice, staying about 20 feet away. None of us had brought any weapons, besides our pocket knives. Jake had bear spray, but it was in his backpack on the other side of the tent. The thing outside moved toward our food bag, which we'd hung from a tree branch about 100 feet from our tent. At least we'd remembered that part of the ranger's instructions. We heard some rustling over there, then silence. After about 20 minutes of terrified waiting, we started to relax a bit, thinking whatever it was had left. Chris whispered, "Should we look outside?" "Hell no," Jake and I said in unison. None of us slept the rest of the night. We just sat there, backs against each other, jumping at every sound. As soon as the first hint of dawn appeared, we packed up camp faster than I thought possible. We didn't even make coffee or breakfast. We just wanted out of there. During the paddle out, we tried to convince ourselves it was just a bear, probably as scared of us as we were of it. But something kept nagging at me. First, the sound it made when I peed on it. Bear's grunt, sure. But this sound expressed disgust, like, ugh, what the hell, man? It wasn't an animal sound of pain or surprise. It was annoyance. The kind of sound a person makes when something gross happens to them. Second, the way it moved. Bears can stand on their hind legs, but they don't typically go from belly down to upright in one smooth motion. This thing stood up like a person would, in one fluid movement. But the detail that really haunts me was my reaction. I've encountered black bears before. They're not typically aggressive, especially if you make noise and back away slowly. Yet my instinctive reaction was absolute terror. Not normal caution, but bone-deep primal fear that had me running blindly back to the tent. It was like some ancient part of my brain recognized a danger my conscious mind couldn't identify. It took us all day to canoe and portage back to our entry point. We barely talked the whole time, each lost in our own thoughts. When we finally reached the truck, Jake suggested staying in a motel in Grand Marais instead of camping at a site near the entry point as we'd planned. None of us objected. That night, in the safety of a motel room with locked doors, we finally discussed it. Chris was convinced it was just a bear, explaining away my observations as the product of moonlight, fear, and an active imagination. Jake wasn't so sure, but didn't offer alternatives. I kept my deepest suspicion to myself, that what I'd encountered wasn't a bear at all. It wasn't until years later, during my sophomore year of college, that I stumbled across some obscure online forums where people shared similar experiences in remote wilderness areas. Reading their accounts sent chills down my spine. The same unnatural movement, the same overwhelming fear response that seemed out of proportion to encountering normal wildlife. One account in particular struck me. A hiker in Olympic National Park described encountering what he believed was a juvenile Sasquatch. He described it as being about 5 tall, moving with a peculiar gait that was unmistakably non-ursine. What really got me was his description of the feeling he had, not just fear, but a sense that he was in the presence of something intelligent that didn't want to be seen. I've spent hundreds of nights in the wilderness since then. I've encountered more bears, moose, even a mountain lion once while hiking in Colorado. None of those encounters triggered the same response as whatever I met that night in the Boundary Waters. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I've spent 24 years trying to convince myself it was just a black bear cub. That would be the rational explanation. But deep down, I know what I experienced. The movement, the sound, and most of all, that instinctive fear response that felt hardwired into my DNA. I've never gone back to that specific site in the Boundary Waters, though I've canoed other parts of it many times since. Whatever was there that night in 1999 fundamentally changed how I view the wilderness. It's still my happy place, still where I feel most alive, but I no longer assume I understand everything that lives there. Sometimes I wonder if it tells its own version of this story. The night some idiot human peed on it while it was trying to sleep. I imagine it has a better ending in that version. I still don't know exactly what I encountered that night, but I know this. There are things in the deep wilderness that don't fit neatly into the categories we're taught, things that move between the moonlight and shadows. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you might just pee on one of them. Story 9. I've spent my whole life outdoors. Fishing, hunting, camping, you name it. Minnesota's wilderness has been my second home since I was a kid. But what happened that summer night in 2004 changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. Let me start by saying I'm not the type who scares easily. I've dealt with aggressive bears, been lost in the backwoods during storms, and once nearly flipped my boat in rapids. I've always kept my cool. My buddies joke that I don't have a nervous system, or at least they used to. It was late July, one of those perfect Minnesota summer nights. Warm enough to be comfortable, but cool enough that the mosquitoes weren't eating you alive. My buddy Mark and I decided to do some night fishing at this spot we'd been going to for years. Barge Bay. It's this little inlet off the main river, surrounded by these ancient cottonwoods that have probably been there since before my grandpa was born. The fishing there is usually incredible after dark. Catfish, walleye, you name it. I had my boat all tricked out for night fishing. Powerful LED lights mounted on the bow that could light up the shoreline like it was day. They were practically truck headlights, and my wife always teased me about overdoing it with my gear. Those lights saved our lives that night. We got to Barge Bay around 9 p.m., just as darkness was really settling in. We anchored about 15-20 feet from the shore, close enough to cast toward the tree line, where the big fish like to hide, but far enough that we wouldn't snag our lines on submerged roots. The water was calm, almost glassy. You could see the moon reflecting off it. For about 2 hours, everything was normal. We caught a few decent-sized walleye, drank a couple beers, and just enjoyed the quiet. We kept the lights off because fish spook easy, and we were using our headlamps only when absolutely necessary. The darkness out there is complete, the kind city people never experience. When your eyes adjust, you can see the stars like you wouldn't believe, but the shoreline was just a black wall. It must have been around 11:30 when we first heard it. At first I thought it was a deer coming down to the water. They do that at night sometimes. But something felt off. The footsteps were too deliberate, too heavy, too bipedal. Whatever was walking was on 2 feet, not 4, and it was big. Each step made this soft, thudding sound, dampened by the river silt but unmistakable. "You hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice already tense. I nodded, not wanting to speak. Something about those footsteps put me on edge immediately. The walking stopped for maybe 30 seconds, then started again, closer to the shoreline. That's when I started feeling something I can't really explain. It was like this wave of panic that came out of nowhere. My heart went from normal to pounding in my chest. My mouth went dry. My eyes started watering for no reason. I've faced down a charging moose before without flinching, but suddenly I was terrified, and I couldn't explain why. Looking over at Mark, I could tell he felt it too. His face had gone completely white in the dim glow of the tackle box light. He was frozen, rod in hand, staring toward the shore. "Jackson," he whispered, his voice cracking, "something's wrong." Time started doing weird things. Every second felt stretched out, but somehow everything was happening too fast. The footsteps kept coming, steady and deliberate, right to the water's edge. Whatever it was directly in front of our boat now, hidden in the darkness. I've never experienced anything like the fear I felt in that moment. It wasn't rational, it wasn't normal, it was primal. Every instinct in my body was screaming danger in a way I'd never felt before or since. My hand moved to the light switch almost on its own. I didn't even consciously decide to do it. 1 second I was paralyzed with fear. The next I was flipping on those powerful LED lights, flooding the shoreline with bright white light. What I saw in that instant will stay with me until the day I die. Standing right at the water's edge, not 20 feet from our boat, was something. Someone. A figure so large it didn't seem possible. My first thought, oddly enough, was, that's not a person. But it wasn't an animal either. At least not any animal I've ever seen in Minnesota's woods. It was shaped like a man, but massive, towering at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. broad shoulders, powerful build, covered in dark hair or fur. The face, God, the face is what haunts me. It wasn't a mask, it wasn't makeup. It was a face that was somehow both ape-like and human at the same time. Prominent brow, wide nose, but with eyes that... There was intelligence there. Awareness. And in the split second after I hit those lights, I saw something that chills me even now as I type this. I saw its expression change from curiosity to shock. Its eyes widened. It actually flinched from the sudden brightness. Then it moved, faster than something that size should be able to move, stepping behind one of the massive cottonwood trees at the shoreline. But it was too big to hide completely. I could still see parts of it peeking from behind the trunk, watching us. Mark was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. I had a sidearm in the boat I always carry when I'm in remote areas, but the thought of using it never even crossed my mind. All I could think was, "Get out, now!" I shoved Mark aside, yanked up the anchor so hard I nearly flipped us, and got my hand on the outboard motor pull. It started on the first try, thank God. I cranked the throttle full open, not caring about the wake we were causing or the fishing gear sliding around. As we sped away, I kept the lights pointing at the shore. The figure stepped slightly out from behind the tree, watching us go. I swear to you, and I've told this to exactly 3 people before today, it tilted its head slightly, like it was curious about us running away. We didn't speak the entire ride back to the launch. I think we were both in shock. When we finally got the boat on the trailer, Mark looked at me and said, "What the fuck was that?" I had no answer. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those eyes, that expression of surprise when the lights hit it. I've encountered every animal in these woods at some point, bears, wolves, moose, and none of them react like that. None of them hide behind trees. None of them show emotions. About a week later, I went back, alone, in daylight. I know it was stupid, but I had to know. I had to see if there was evidence, tracks, anything. The logical part of my brain was working overtime trying to explain what we'd seen. I'm 6'3", and about 220 pounds. Not a small guy. I stood by that same cottonwood tree and looked out at where our boat had been anchored. Based on my height and the tree's size, whatever we saw had to be at least 7'5", maybe taller. And the way it moved. It had to weigh hundreds of pounds more than me, but it was quick, agile. There were no distinct tracks. The ground near the shore was too muddy and had been rained on since our encounter, but I did find some broken branches higher up on the trees than a person could reach, and what looked like hair caught on some bark. Dark, coarse hair that wasn't from any deer or bear. I've spent almost 2 decades in the wilderness. I know every animal in these woods. What we saw that night wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a guy in a costume. The pure terror we felt wasn't normal fear. It was something else. Something I can't explain. I've done some research since then. I've read accounts from others who've had similar experiences. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some have other names for it. I don't know what to call it, but I know what I saw. The thing that gets me most, the detail I can't shake, is the intelligence in its eyes, the way it tried to hide, the curiosity as it watched us flee. That wasn't animal behavior, at least not any animal we acknowledge exists. I've been back to Barge Bay many times since then, always in daylight, always with someone else. I've never seen it again. Part of me hopes I never do, but another part wants confirmation, wants to know I'm not crazy. I still fish, I still hunt, I still spend more time in the woods than most people, but I never go out at night anymore, and I never ever turn off my lights when I'm near the shore. Sometimes when I'm in the woods alone, I get this feeling of being watched. The hair on my neck stands up, and I get that same inexplicable panic rising in my chest. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the memory of that night playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know better. Deep down, I know there are things in these woods that don't fit neatly into biology textbooks. Things that watch and think and hide. I know because I looked one in the eyes that summer night at Barge Bay, and sometimes in my nightmares, it's still looking back. A sitch. Story 10. Day A. I never thought I'd find myself back there, not after what happened in 2004. Yet somehow, last May, I ended up hiking those same woods near Bemidji, where I had my first encounter. I've been putting off writing about this for months because, honestly, I'm still trying to process it. For those who don't know me, I'm Marcus. I'm 6'3", 220 pounds, and I've spent most of my life outdoors. I'm not the type to jump at shadows or make up stories. What I experienced in 2004-2005 changed my perspective on everything I thought I knew about our forests. I saw something that shouldn't exist according to science, but there it was, a Sasquatch moving through the trees about 80 yards from me. Clear as day. For years after that, I avoided going back to those specific woods, not out of fear exactly, but more from a weird sense of respect, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. But time passes, memories fade a bit and curiosity grows. May 14th, 2015 was unseasonably cool in northern Minnesota. The trees had their fresh spring foliage, but the night temperatures were still dipping into the low 40s. I remember because I'd worn a light jacket over my flannel shirt and was still feeling the morning chill when I parked my truck at the trailhead around 7:30 a.m. I hadn't planned on investigating anything that day. Honestly, I just wanted a peaceful morning hike before heading to my sister's place for lunch. I packed light, just water, trail mix, my phone, and a small digital camera I sometimes use to document interesting flora or wildlife. The trail was quiet that morning. Tourist season hadn't kicked in yet, and it was a Thursday, so even locals were mostly at work. I'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes when something tugged at me. Not physically, but mentally. A feeling that I should veer off the maintained path and check out a small ridge about 200 yards east of the trail. I've learned to trust these instincts over the years. They're not supernatural or anything. I think it's just your subconscious noticing subtle details your conscious mind misses. Maybe I heard something. Maybe I saw movement from the corner of my eye. Whatever it was, I decided to follow that feeling. The ground was still pretty firm from the winter freeze-thaw cycle. Spring in Minnesota doesn't mean soft ground right away. It takes weeks of consistent warmth to really thaw things out. My boots barely left impressions as I trudged through the underbrush toward the ridge. I remember pausing about halfway there, taking a swig of water and looking back at the trail I'd left behind. It was one of those moments where you suddenly realize how quiet it is. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of leaves rustling in the slight breeze. I should have recognized that silence for what it was, a warning. When I reached the base of the ridge, I noticed it right away. About 15 feet up the gentle slope was a young aspen tree, probably 8 to 10 inches in diameter, that had been, there's no other way to describe it, twisted and snapped about 3 feet off the ground, not cut with an axe or saw, not pushed over by wind. Twisted like someone had grabbed it and wrung it like a wet towel before snapping it. The strange part was that the tree was still alive. Fresh green leaves were sprouting from branches that now hung precariously toward the ground. This had happened recently, days, not weeks ago. I approached it slowly, examining the damage. The break wasn't clean. The wood fibers were stretched and torn, with the outer bark spiraled like someone had grabbed the trunk and twisted with immense force before breaking it. The top portion of the tree was still partially attached, hanging down at an unnatural angle. I've seen storm damage, bear damage, and damage from fallen trees hitting other trees. This was different. This required strength that no human could possibly possess. I'm a big guy, and I couldn't even begin to twist a living tree that size. My heart started beating faster, not from fear exactly, but from the realization that I might be in an active area. I took out my camera and snapped several photos of the tree from different angles. Then I started examining the ground around it more carefully. The slope had patches of dead leaves, pine needles, and exposed earth. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. I expanded my search, walking in gradually widening circles around the broken tree. About 30 feet north, in a small clearing where the ground was exposed, I saw it. A single footprint. I've spent enough time outdoors to recognize animal tracks, human boot prints, and everything in between. This was neither. The impression was faint, but unmistakable. A right foot, humanoid in shape, but massive in size. It measured roughly 17 inches long, about 3-4 inches longer than my size 13.5 boots. The print showed 5 toes, with the big toe in proportion to the foot. Unlike a human print where the big toe is often more pronounced, the midfoot had less of an arch than a human foot would leave. The heel was wide and heavily pressed into the ground. I squatted down next to it, trying to process what I was seeing. My first thought was to look for a track line, additional prints that would show direction of travel, but there were none, just this single, isolated impression. I tried to make my own footprint nearby for comparison. Despite my weight, the ground barely gave under my boot. It was too compacted, too firm from the seasonal conditions. Whatever left this print had to weigh considerably more than me. My hands were actually shaking as I took photos of the print with my camera. I placed my water bottle next to it for scale, then my boot. The size difference was undeniable. It was around this time that I began feeling watched. Anyone who spent significant time in the woods knows that feeling, the prickle on the back of your neck, the sudden awareness that you're not alone. I straightened up and surveyed my surroundings. The ridge continued upward another 30 or 40 feet before leveling off into denser forest. To my right, the land sloped down toward a small seasonal creek that was barely flowing this time of year. To my left, thick brush and fallen logs created a natural barrier. Behind me was the way back to the trail. I stood completely still and listened. The forest was still unusually quiet, but now I could hear something else, a subtle cracking sound from somewhere up the ridge. Not the sharp crack of a breaking branch, but the softer sound of weight shifting on fallen twigs and leaves. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If it was a hiker, they would have responded. If it was an animal, I'd just announced my presence unnecessarily. And if it was what I suspected it might be, I decided to push further up the ridge. In retrospect, this was probably stupid. I should have headed back to the trail, back to my truck, and brought others to see what I'd found. But the investigator in me couldn't turn away, not when I was potentially so close. As I climbed higher, the vegetation grew thicker. Fallen logs and brush made progress difficult. I had to weave my way through, occasionally ducking under branches or climbing over obstacles. The entire time, that feeling of being watched intensified. About 20 yards further up, I found another disturbance, a section of brush that had been pushed aside, creating a rough pathway about 3 feet wide. The broken stems and branches were still green, indicating this too was recent. I followed this path cautiously, camera in hand. The path led to another clearing, smaller than the first. Here, the ground was covered with moss and pine needles, not ideal for tracking. But what caught my attention was a rock outcropping at the far end. It was roughly chest-high, with a small crevice underneath that extended back into darkness. Something had been digging there. The moss and dirt around the opening had been pulled away, exposing freshly turned earth. Next to the disturbance was a broken stick about 3 feet long that appeared to have been used as a digging tool. The end was frayed and covered with the same dark soil from the hole. I approached slowly, camera raised. As I got closer, I noticed something else. A smell, not the regular earthy forest smell, but something musky and strong, like wet animal fur mixed with something I can't quite describe. It wasn't rotting or putrid, just powerful and completely unfamiliar. The hole itself was about 18 inches in diameter and extended back into darkness. Without a flashlight, I couldn't see how deep it went. I took photos, then picked up a small stone and tossed it in, listening for it to hit bottom. The soft thud came quickly. It wasn't particularly deep. I was reaching for another stone when I heard it, a deep, rumbling sound from somewhere in the trees beyond the clearing. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt, but something in between, low enough that I felt it as much as heard it. I froze. For several seconds I didn't move a muscle. My eyes scanned the tree line, looking for any movement, any shape that didn't belong. The forest had gone completely silent again. Even the breeze seemed to have stopped. Then I saw movement about 50 yards away, through a gap in the trees. Just a flash of something large and dark moving from one tree to another. It was so quick I couldn't make out details, but whatever it was moved bipedally and was considerably taller than the surrounding brush. My mouth went dry. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I knew that was the worst thing I could do. If this was a Sasquatch, and at this point I was pretty convinced it was, running would trigger a chase response. Instead, I slowly backed away from the hole, keeping my eyes on where I'd seen the movement. As I retreated, I heard another sound, this time from my left. A deliberate breaking of a branch, loud enough that I knew it wasn't accidental. It was a warning. That's when I realized what was happening. I wasn't tracking it. It was herding me. The broken tree, the footprint, the cleared path. These weren't random findings. I was being led in a specific direction, away from something important. Maybe a bedding area. Maybe young ones. I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that I needed to get out of there. Not in panic, but with purpose. I began moving laterally across the ridge rather than going back the way I came. My thinking was to circle around whatever was in the trees and make my way back to the trail from a different angle. As I moved, I could hear subtle movements paralleling me in the forest, branches shifting, leaves rustling, not from wind, but from something large, carefully picking its way through the vegetation, always maintaining distance, always just out of clear sight. I came to another small clearing and stopped to catch my breath and get my bearings. That's when I heard the wood knocks, 3 distinct sounds, like someone striking a tree with a heavy stick. Knock, 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 followed by silence. From somewhere much further away came a response. 2 knocks. Then silence again. I've read enough reports and talked to enough researchers to know what this meant. They were communicating, and there were at least 2 of them. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put my camera back in my pocket. I wasn't panicking, but I was certainly experiencing a level of adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. I took a deep breath and continued moving, faster now but still trying not to appear like prey. The terrain began sloping downward, which I knew would eventually lead back toward the main trail. As I descended, the vegetation thinned slightly, allowing better visibility. I kept scanning my surroundings, looking for any sign of movement. About halfway down the slope, I glimpsed it again. A large, dark figure moving between trees about 40 yards to my right. Just for a second, but long enough to confirm it was bipedal, massive, and covered in dark hair or fur. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful arms. I froze again, heart pounding. Our eyes met, or at least it felt like they did. Even at that distance, I could feel the intelligence in that gaze. This wasn't a mindless animal. This was something calculating, something aware. For perhaps 5 seconds, we stared at each other through the gaps in the foliage. Then it deliberately moved behind a large pine tree and was gone. I continued down the slope, moving faster now. The paralleling sounds continued, but they were becoming more distant, less concerned with stealth. It was escorting me out of its territory, making sure I left. When I finally reached the main trail, the relief was overwhelming. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, listening. The woods were still quiet, but the oppressive feeling of being watched had diminished. I looked at my watch, 10:17 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 hours, but it felt like days. I had evidence on my camera, the twisted tree, the footprint, the digging site. Physical proof to complement what I'd experienced. I made it back to my truck without further incident. My hands were still shaking as I started the engine. I sat there for several minutes, processing what had happened, before driving away. When I got to my sister's place, I immediately downloaded the photos to her computer. The broken tree was clearly visible, the damage unmistakable. The footprint was visible, but not as clear in the photos as it had been in person. A common problem with footprint documentation. The digging site photos showed the cleared area and the stick, but without the context of being there, they could have been anything. I've spent the month since trying to make sense of what happened. I've gone back twice with other researchers, but we found no fresh signs. The footprint had been washed away by rain. The broken tree was still there, now dead and brown. The digging site had been disturbed, the hole filled in with leaves and debris. What stays with me most is the intelligence I felt that day, the deliberate nature of everything, the placement of the footprint, the clearing of the path, the wood knocks, the way it herded me away. This wasn't a random encounter with a wild animal. This was an interaction with something that knew exactly what it was doing. I'm still processing this encounter, still trying to reconcile what I know scientifically with what I experienced personally. All I can say with certainty is that something inhabits those Minnesota woods that defies conventional explanation. Something powerful enough to snap living trees, intelligent enough to communicate with others of its kind, and cautious enough to remain largely hidden from human detection. The broken tree and the single footprint weren't random. They were messages, and I was meant to find them. Ardenno. Story 11. I've been replaying what happened that night over and over in my head for years now. It was November 2018, during rifle deer season in northern Minnesota. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake a little. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old, spent thousands of nights in the wilderness, and never experienced anything remotely close to what happened that night. Me, Mason, and Caleb had been hunting together for over a decade. We're not weekend warriors. We're the real deal. Mason's dad taught him to track deer when he was 5. Caleb could identify any animal by its tracks before he could ride a bike, and I'd been hunting that same remote spot for 27 years. This wasn't our first rodeo. We'd found this spot years back. It's insanely remote, at the dead end of an old, overgrown logging road surrounded by impassable peat bogs. You need a serious 4x4 to even get there, and then it's another mile hike to our camp spot. No cell service, no other hunters, nothing but miles and miles of wilderness, just how we like it. We'd arrived 4 days before the rifle opener to set up camp, place our stands, and do some grouse hunting. The weather had been perfect, cold enough to keep the bugs away, but not so frigid that we were miserable. We'd bagged several grouse on Thursday, cleaned them at camp, and tossed the remains at the edge of the woodline in front of our camp, maybe 30 yards from the fire pit. Nothing unusual about that. That Thursday night, we were sitting around the campfire, drinking some whiskey, bullshitting about past hunts, and just enjoying being away from civilization. It was around 10:30 or 11 p.m. No moon that night, just pitch black all around us except for the fire's glow. Mason was telling some stupid story about his ex-wife when I noticed something weird in the woods ahead of us. 2 yellowish orbs of light, deep in the woods, maybe 100 yards out. They weren't flashlights, more like old-style lantern light with that warm glow. They were stationary at first, and we all stopped talking at once when we saw them. "You guys see that?" Caleb whispered. We all nodded. Mason stood up, squinting into the darkness. Probably other hunters, he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Here's the thing, there shouldn't have been other hunters. Not there. We were literally miles from the nearest possible camp spot, surrounded by bogs no one could cross, especially not in the pitch dark. I was about to yell out a hello when the lights just went out, simultaneously. And that's when I noticed something else that made the hair on my neck stand up. The forest had gone completely silent. If you've spent time in the northern woods, you know they're never completely quiet, even at night. There's always something. Insects buzzing, an owl, the rustle of small creatures. But suddenly, there was nothing. Absolute dead silence. Then we heard it. Footsteps, coming from the exact direction where we'd seen the lights and where we'd thrown the grouse remains. Not animal footsteps, not the 4-beat pattern of a deer or the shuffling of a bear. These were bipedal footsteps, deliberate, slow, human-like. Step, step, step. I've heard plenty of animals in the woods at night. This wasn't that. Without a word, Trevor and I grabbed our rifles. Caleb picked up the high-powered flashlight we keep by the fire. We aimed both the guns and the light toward the sound. Nothing, just darkness beyond the beam. But the footsteps continued, now sounding like they were circling to our right, just outside the ring of firelight. Step, step, step. "Who's there?" Mason called out, his voice surprisingly steady. No response, just those footsteps, now moving further to our right. And then, this is the part that still gives me chills, we heard something behind us, a sound I can't really describe accurately. The closest I can come is to say it was like throat singing, like gibberish spoken from the back of the throat. Not words, not animal sounds, but vocalization, almost like someone trying to imitate Japanese or Mongolian speech without knowing the language. Deep, throaty, completely unnatural. My blood went ice cold. We were surrounded. We spun around, Caleb swinging the flashlight toward the sound. Again, nothing visible. But the vocalizations continued, now seeming to come from multiple directions. That's when whatever was in front of us, where we'd first seen the lights, started running, not toward us but parallel to our camp. The footfalls were rapid, heavy, and definitely bipedal. Caleb's hand was shaking so bad, the flashlight beam was dancing all over the place. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered. Before anyone could answer, we heard a loud crack from our left side. All three of us jerked toward the sound. About 75 yards away, silhouetted against the night sky, we watched a tree fall. Not just any tree, the exact pine tree we'd used earlier that day to sight in our rifles. We'd hung targets on it, spent an hour there making sure our scopes were zeroed. The tree crashed to the ground, and then silence again. Complete silence. I'd like to say we were brave, that we grabbed our gear and went investigating. But that would be a lie. We stoked that fire as high as it would go, sat back to back to back in a tight circle, rifles on our laps, and didn't move until dawn. None of us slept. None of us even spoke much. We just listened to that unnatural silence all night long. The weirdest part? I've had encounters in the woods before. Twice, once in 2007 and again in 2012. Different places, different circumstances. Both times, I'd felt this overwhelming sense of dread and panic, that flight response that bypasses your conscious brain and tells your body to run. But this time was different. I was scared, sure, but it was a calculated kind of fear. I felt watched, studied, tested, but not in immediate danger. When the sun finally rose, we cautiously explored the area. The tree had definitely fallen, a healthy 30-foot pine snapped about 4 feet from the base. Not cut, not rotted, just broken, like something had pushed it over with tremendous force. We found no footprints, nothing to indicate what had been moving around our camp. The grouse remains were gone, though. Here's what keeps me up at night. The systematic way whatever it was surrounded us. The coordination. Those weird vocalizations that seemed to be communication of some kind. And the tree, that wasn't random. That was a message. That was the exact tree we'd spent time at earlier. It was significant to us. And somehow, they knew that. We packed up and left that morning. Didn't even stay for opening day of deer season. First time in 27 years I missed an opener. We talked about it the whole drive home, trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was other hunters messing with us. But how did they know which tree we'd used? And those sounds weren't human. No way. Bears, wolves. Neither explains the lights, the bipedal walking, or the vocalizations. Moose. Same problems, plus moose don't work together to surround prey. We've been back to those woods since then, but never to that exact spot, and never just the three of us. We bring more people now, more lights, more guns. Call us paranoid if you want. I don't know what was out there that night. I don't claim it was anything supernatural or cryptid or whatever. All I know is that after almost 3 decades of hunting those woods, I'm now absolutely certain we're not the apex predator out there. Something intelligent shares those forests with us, something that can communicate, coordinate, and send a very clear message. You are in our territory, we are watching you, and we can get to you anytime we want. The weirdest thing is that I don't think they wanted to hurt us. If they did, they had every opportunity. We were surrounded in the dark, miles from help. No, they wanted us to know they were there. They wanted us to leave. And it worked. It's been 5 years now. I still hunt, still spend nights in the wilderness, but I never, ever feel alone out there anymore. And when the woods go silent, I don't wait around to see what's coming. I leave, because now I know. When the forest goes quiet, it's not because there's nothing there. It's because something is there that everything else fears. Story 12. I never planned on sharing this. For over a decade, I've kept these experiences to myself, partly because I didn't want people thinking I was crazy, and partly because I still can't make sense of what happened, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. I bought a small piece of property in the Allegheny National Forest back in 2012. Nothing fancy, just 5 acres of dense woodland that slopes down to Tiona Creek. I'd always dreamed of building a cabin there, somewhere I could disconnect from the world. The area is beautiful but remote. The nearest neighbor is over 2 miles away, and cell service is basically non-existent except for one specific spot on the property. Before building anything permanent, I wanted to get a feel for the land. So I started camping there on weekends, clearing trees and prepping the building site. I'd drive up Friday after work, pitch my tent, and spend Saturday and Sunday working on the land. It was therapeutic, just me, my tools, and the forest. Nothing unusual happened during those first few months. I'd hear the normal forest sounds, owls, the occasional coyote in the distance, rustling leaves. The property sits between 2 parallel ridge lines with Tiona Creek flowing through the valley. My camping spot was about 1,400 feet up the eastern slope, with the ridge top about 400 feet above me at roughly 1,800 feet. The creek sits at about 1,300 feet at the bottom. It was mid-July, probably around the 20th, when the first incident happened. I remember the date because it was unusually hot that weekend, and I'd stayed up later than normal trying to cool down. I'd been clearing trees all day and was exhausted, but the heat inside the tent was unbearable, so I decided to sit by my small campfire until it cooled off a bit. The night was perfectly still. Even the insects seemed quieter than usual. It must have been around midnight, and I was just staring into the dying embers, half dozed off when I heard it. A whoop. But not just any whoop. This was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was loud, unnaturally loud, like it was amplified somehow. It came from the eastern ridgeline, maybe 50 yards south of where I was sitting, up near the top of the ridge. The sound seemed to echo through my entire body. I've been hunting since I was a kid. I know what deer, bears, coyotes, and birds sound like. I've even watched those Bigfoot shows where they play recordings of supposed Sasquatch calls. This wasn't like any of those. The whoop itself was deep and powerful, but what really froze me in place was how it ended, with this bizarre backward inhaling popping sound, almost like a giant fish gulping air at the water's surface, but much, much louder. I sat completely still, every hair on my body standing on end. My campfire had almost died out, and suddenly the darkness around me felt oppressive. I strained my ears, waiting for another sound, but there was nothing, just complete silence. Even the normal forest ambience had stopped. No crickets, no distant owls, nothing. After about 5 minutes of this eerie silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and quickly retreated to my tent, zipping it up tight, as if that thin nylon would protect me from whatever made that sound. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the flashlight on until dawn, jumping at every twig snap and gust of wind. When morning finally came, I packed up and left earlier than planned. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably just some animal I wasn't familiar with, maybe an elk or something, though I knew damn well elk weren't common in that area. Despite my uneasiness, I returned the next weekend. The work needed to get done, and daylight brought back my rational thinking. I didn't hear the sound again during that summer, and eventually the incident faded to the back of my mind as I focused on building my cabin. Fast forward about 3 years. The cabin was finally built. Nothing extravagant, just a simple one-room structure with a small loft for sleeping. It sits on the same eastern slope, facing the creek. After realizing I couldn't get any cell service inside the cabin, I built a small detached deck about 80 feet downhill where, for whatever reason, I could get just enough signal to text my wife. It was a clear summer evening, probably around late July or early August. I was sitting on this deck after texting my wife that I'd arrived safely. It must have been between 9 and 10 p.m. The sky was exceptionally clear, and I was just relaxing, looking up at the stars and watching the occasional commercial airplane pass overhead. That's when I saw it. From the southwest, just above the tree line across the river, a glowing white orb appeared. It was about the size of a cantaloupe from my perspective, and it was moving in a perfectly straight line from southwest to northeast. Unlike an airplane, there were no blinking lights, just this steady, internal white glow. It wasn't blindingly bright, but definitely visible against the night sky. What struck me was how smoothly it moved. No wobbling, no changing altitude, just this perfect trajectory across the valley. It continued on its path until it disappeared from my view, heading in the exact same direction from which that strange whoop had originated years earlier. As soon as the orb disappeared, I felt wrong. My stomach knotted up, and I felt this wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't fear exactly, more like this deep physical unease, like my body was reacting to something my mind couldn't process. The feeling lasted for hours, well after I'd gone back to the cabin. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, a drone maybe, but this was pretty remote territory and drones weren't as common back then. Plus, the light pattern wasn't like any drone I'd seen. A military aircraft? Possible, but it was silent, completely silent, and the way it moved just didn't seem mechanical. Again, I pushed the experience to the back of my mind. I told myself it was probably something perfectly normal that just looked strange in the dark. But deep down I knew it wasn't normal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that these two incidents, the whoop and the orb, were somehow connected. The third and final incident happened last summer, on August 3rd. This one's still so fresh in my mind that I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. I was at the cabin for a long weekend. The weather had been rainy and humid all day, and by evening a thick fog had settled in the valley. I'm talking pea soup fog, visibility less than 20 feet in any direction. I couldn't even see the creek from my deck. I'd gone down to the deck around dusk to check my phone as usual. The fog was disorienting, making the familiar surroundings seem alien and closed in. As I was standing there, squinting into the whiteness, I noticed a soft glow appearing between the ridgelines. At first, I thought maybe it was headlights from a distant road reflecting off the fog, But as it got brighter, I could see it was a pale orange orb, similar in size to the white one I'd seen years before. This time, though, it wasn't moving. It just hovered there in the fog, pulsing slightly. I had my phone with me and pulled up a star tracking app, thinking maybe it was a planet or something astronomical appearing strangely through the fog. But the app showed nothing in that direction that could account for what I was seeing. I don't know what came over me, but I found myself speaking out loud to it. I said, "Okay, I see you. You have my attention. Now show me." I didn't even finish my sentence when suddenly multiple coyote howls erupted from downstream. Now, coyotes aren't unusual in these woods, but what happened next definitely was. The howling seemed to be moving, traveling upstream in what sounded like the middle of the river. I know these waters. That section of Tiona Creek is about 40 feet wide, with a strong current and plenty of submerged rocks. Nothing could walk up the middle of it, especially not coyotes. I stood there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The thought literally crossed my mind. This can't be real coyotes. Nothing could move like that up the river. The instant I had that thought, and I mean the very instant, the coyote sounds transformed into loud pig snorting. It was like someone had flipped a switch from one audio track to another. These snorts continued moving upstream at exactly the same pace the coyote sounds had been traveling. I felt the blood drain from my face. Whatever this was, it had responded to my unspoken thought. It had read my mind. The pig noises continued for maybe 30 seconds before they abruptly changed again, this time to crow calls. These crow sounds traveled another 200 yards or so upstream before stopping completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked back toward where the orange orb had been, and without thinking I whispered, "Thank you for showing me." The light was gone, just like that. No fading, no moving away, just gone. I practically ran back to the cabin, locked the door, and stayed inside until morning. Even with the door locked and windows shut, I felt exposed, like whatever intelligence was out there could see right through the walls, and right through me. All three of these experiences happened along the same directional line through the forest. The whoop came from the northeast ridge. The white orb traveled southwest to northeast. The orange orb appeared directly between the ridges, with the sound phenomena traveling northeast again. It's like there's some kind of corridor or pathway there that I accidentally built my cabin next to. I still own the property. I still visit the cabin, but I've never told my wife or friends exactly what happened there. How could I? Hey, I think there's something intelligent in the woods that can manipulate sound and light and possibly read minds. They'd think I was losing it. But I know what I experienced. I know it wasn't my imagination. Something intelligent was interacting with me, responding to both my spoken and unspoken thoughts in ways that I can't explain. It knew I was there. It wanted me to know it was there too. I've spent countless hours researching similar experiences. I've gone down rabbit holes about everything from government experiments to interdimensional beings to ancient native spirits. Nothing quite matches what I experienced. The strangest part, I don't feel threatened by it. Unsettled, yes. Afraid, definitely, but not threatened. If whatever it is wanted to harm me, it's had plenty of opportunities. Sometimes I sit on that deck and hope to see the light again, to hear that strange whoop. Other times, I pray I never experience anything like it again. The not knowing is what gets to me, not knowing what it is, what it wants, why it chose to reveal itself to me. All I know for certain is that the wilderness is watching, and sometimes it answers back. Story 13. I've been hesitating to write this down for a long time. It's been over 4 years now, but I still get this weird feeling in my stomach when I think about what happened that night. I've been a police officer for 12 years, And I've seen some seriously messed up stuff, but nothing has ever shaken me like this. It was June 1st, 2019. I'd taken my son camping in Kisatchie National Forest in Louisiana. He was 6.5 at the time, and I was trying to get him into outdoor stuff early. My buddy Mark and his girlfriend Jess came along too. We'd been to this particular spot several times before. It was this nice clearing with woods on 3 sides, pretty secluded but still accessible with our forerunners. Being a cop, I'm always a bit paranoid about safety, especially with my kid around. I brought my service pistol, 9mm, and my hunting rifle plus extra ammo. Not that I was expecting trouble. It just helps me relax knowing I'm prepared. Friday was completely normal. We got there around noon, set up our tents, gathered firewood, and just hung out. My son was having a blast helping build the fire pit. Mark and Jess had this fancy rooftop tent on their forerunner, while my son and I had a regular ground tent about 30-40 yards away. We stayed up till about 10, roasting marshmallows and telling stupid stories before turning in. Saturday started out great. We spent most of the day exploring some off-road trails. My son rode with me and he thought it was the coolest thing ever when we'd hit these little mud puddles. We got back to camp around 4 p.m. and I noticed something odd right away. Some of our stuff had been moved around, not like ransacked or anything, but just slightly off from where we'd left it. The chairs were in different positions, and some of our cooking gear had been shifted. I figured it was probably just the wind, or maybe some curious raccoons or something. That evening, we cooked tacos over the campfire, which is my son's favorite camping meal. Then we made s'mores and watched the stars come out. My son was exhausted from all the excitement, so we headed to our tent around 9 p.m., a bit earlier than the night before. Mark and Jess stayed up a little longer before climbing up to their rooftop setup. Around 11, I realized I'd forgotten to put my iPad in the truck to charge. My son was already fast asleep, so I carefully unzipped the tent and stepped out. The night was clear, with a half moon giving just enough light to see by. I quickly put the iPad on the charger in my forerunner and headed back to the tent. In my hurry, I completely forgot to grab my rifle from where I'd leaned it against the truck earlier. Stupid mistake. I just had my 9mm in the tent with us. I got back in, zipped up, and settled into my sleeping bag. I could hear Mark and Jess talking quietly in their tent, and the normal nighttime forest sounds all around. Crickets, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl. Eventually I started drifting off to sleep. It must have been around 11:30 or so. That's when I first noticed it. The silence. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. 1 minute the forest was alive with sound, and the next absolutely nothing. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. In my years of camping and hunting, I'd never experienced anything like it. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like pressure against my ears. At first I thought maybe I was just too sleepy to hear properly. But then I heard something moving through the thicket behind our tent. The sound was deliberate, careful. Whatever it was trying to be quiet, but it was big enough that complete silence was impossible. I could hear twigs snapping and branches being pushed aside, but there was a rhythm to it that didn't match any animal I knew. My first thought was bear, but we don't get many black bears in that part of Kisatchie, and they're usually pretty noisy. This was different. It was moving with purpose. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake my son. I reached for my pistol and held it against my chest, safety off, but finger alongside the trigger guard, not pointing it anywhere yet, just ready. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. The movement got closer to our tent, and that's when I realized with absolute certainty that whatever was approaching was walking on 2 legs. The footsteps were heavy, way too heavy to be human, and spaced too far apart. Each step had a distinct heel-to-toe quality that you don't get with 4-legged animals. I'm 6'2", and about 220 pounds, and based on the sound, this thing made me feel small. The footsteps came right up to the back of our tent and then stopped. I was frozen in place, barely breathing. I could hear what sounded like breathing on the other side of the tent wall, deep, steady breaths that seemed to make the very air around us vibrate slightly. Then it started moving again, slowly circling our tent. I could feel the percussion of each footstep through the ground. It's hard to describe, but imagine someone dropping a heavy bag of sand nearby. That kind of impact you feel more than hear. When it reached the side of the tent, it did something that still gives me nightmares. It dragged what felt like fingers across the roof of the tent. Not claws, fingers. They moved from one end of the tent to the other in one slow, deliberate motion. The nylon material made this slight scratching sound under the touch. I remember thinking that whatever this thing was, its arm span had to be incredible to reach across the entire tent like that in one smooth movement. The whole time I'm sitting there with my pistol, knowing deep down it wouldn't do a damn thing if this creature decided to come in. The thin nylon tent suddenly seemed like the most useless protection imaginable. But I wasn't just afraid for myself. My son was sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware. All I could think was that I needed to keep him asleep. Some primal instinct told me that if he woke up and started crying or making noise, things would get much worse. The thing completed its circle of our tent, then paused at the front, right by the zippered door. I swear it felt like it was considering coming in. I could hear it breathing, smell a strange odor that's hard to describe. Not the rotting garbage smell people talk about with Sasquatch encounters, but something else. Earthy and wild, but not foul. More like wet fur and something vaguely musky. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20-30 seconds, it turned and started moving away, back toward the woods. It moved faster now, not trying to be as quiet. Branches snapped and undergrowth rustled as it retreated. Even as the sounds got more distant, I couldn't move. I sat there with my gun, listening intently for any sign it might return. I stayed awake the entire night, didn't move from that position, didn't even lie back down, just sat there watching my son sleep, wondering if the creature would come back. The woods stayed silent for at least an hour after it left, before the normal sounds slowly returned. First a few tentative cricket chirps, then gradually the full orchestra of nighttime forest sounds. When the first light of dawn filtered through the tent, I finally let myself breathe normally again. My son woke up cheerful and completely oblivious to what had happened. I didn't say anything to him about it. No need to scare him. I waited until he was occupied with his breakfast before I took a look around the tent. The ground was hard and grassy, so there weren't any clear footprints, but there were definitely signs something had been there. The undergrowth was disturbed in a rough circle around our tent, with broken twigs and flattened grass, showing the path whatever it was had taken. While my son was playing with some toys, I casually asked Mark if he'd heard anything unusual during the night. "Yeah, actually," he said. "Heard footsteps around midnight. Figured it was just you walking around checking on things. You didn't come over by our truck, did you?" I told him no, that I'd been in the tent all night after charging my iPad. I could see him processing this information, his expression changing as he realized the implications. "Probably just a deer or something," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. Neither did I. We packed up and left a few hours later. Made some excuse about needing to get back for work prep the next day. Nobody argued. I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Could it have been a bear walking occasionally on hind legs? Maybe some local playing a prank? But nothing fits. The movement was too deliberate, too intelligent. The height and reach required to drag fingers across our tent the way it did would put this thing at well over 7 feet tall. What stayed with me most is the feeling that it was curious, more than aggressive. It was investigating us, studying us. I can't shake the sense that my son's presence might have actually protected us, that the creature recognized there was a child present and held back because of it. I haven't been back to Kisatchie since then. My son still asks sometimes, but I always find an excuse. I've camped in other places, but never again in that forest. I don't tell this story to many people because I know how it sounds. A cop claiming to have encountered Bigfoot in Louisiana? I'd probably laugh it off too if someone else told me, but I know what I experienced. I know what was outside our tent that night. Something massive, something that walks on two legs but isn't human. Something intelligent enough to investigate us with purpose and deliberation. Sometimes when I'm driving patrol at night and pass by wooded areas, I catch myself scanning the tree line. Not for criminals or stranded motorists, but for something much taller, something watching from just beyond where my headlights can reach. I still have my job, my son, my normal life. But that night changed something fundamental in how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, things that defy explanation, and sometimes they come close enough to remind us that we're not at the top of the food chain after all. Story 14. I've debated whether to share this experience for a long time. It happened on November 8th, 2020, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. As a law enforcement officer, I'm trained to observe, report facts, and maintain composure. But what I saw that night challenged everything I thought I knew about the world around us. I was driving my Toyota 4Runner eastbound on Louisiana Highway 76 near Rosedale, coming back from a weekend trip to Texas. It was around 1 a.m., pitch black out there. Anyone familiar with that stretch knows how isolated it gets. No streetlights, just wetlands, dense woods and sugarcane fields stretching for miles. The kind of darkness where your headlights only cut so far before being swallowed up. Being a cop, I'd modified my vehicle with additional LED ditch lights mounted at the windshield base, angled to illuminate the roadside areas. This wasn't just a professional precaution. That stretch is notorious for deer crossings, and I'd had some close calls before. The highway sits about 3 or 4 feet above the surrounding fields, with deep ditches running alongside. It was harvest season, so the sugarcane stood tall, probably 10 to 12 feet high on either side. I wasn't speeding, maybe doing about 45 feet to me, and hadn't passed another vehicle for at least 20 minutes. The radio was playing low, some late-night talk show I wasn't really paying attention to. I was tired but alert, that kind of focused exhaustion you develop when you've been driving for hours. As I approached the area where the cane fields transition to woodland, something caught my eye. At first, I thought I was seeing amber reflectors in the field, which made no sense. There shouldn't be reflectors out in a sugarcane field. I instinctively slowed down, thinking maybe it was construction equipment I hadn't noticed before. Or perhaps someone had dumped something illegally. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't reflectors. It was eye shine. The kind you see from animals at night when your headlights catch them just right. Except these eyes were far too high off the ground to belong to any deer or coyote or even a bear. They were at least 7 feet up. I slowed down even more, maybe to 15-20 meters, and angled my vehicle slightly to get my ditch lights pointed in that direction. That's when I saw it clearly, and my heart literally skipped a beat. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Standing at the corner of the cane field, partially obscured by the last row of sugarcane but clearly visible, was what I can only describe as a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds, believe me. If someone had told me this story a day earlier, I'd have thought they were drunk or making it up. But I was stone-cold sober, and what I saw was unmistakable. This thing was massive. It stood approximately 8 feet tall. I could gauge this because it was shorter than the surrounding cane by about 2 feet. But what really knocked the wind out of me was what it was holding. A full-grown white-tailed doe, cradled in its arms like you might hold a house cat. The deer's neck was clearly broken, hanging at an unnatural angle, and its legs dangled limply. The creature had frozen in place when my lights hit it, the look on its face, and yes, I could see its face clearly enough to read expression, was what I can only describe as surprised. Like I'd caught it mid-theft. It had that hand-in-the-cookie jar look that I've seen countless times in my line of work, just not on something like this. As I drove slowly past, the thing did something that still gives me chills. Instead of turning its head to watch me pass, it actually took a deliberate step with its left foot, adjusting its position to maintain eye contact with me as I went by. It was a calculated, intelligent movement, not the reaction of a startled animal, but something that wanted to keep track of me. I kept driving, my mind racing. Did I really just see that? Was I hallucinating from exhaustion? But I knew I wasn't. My training kicked in, and I mentally catalogued what I'd seen. Dark cinnamon brown hair covering most of its body, except around the eyes and cheeks, where I could see tannish skin. Its eyes were enormous, reflecting amber in my lights, and strangely, its head seemed small compared to its incredibly broad shoulders. The head had a slightly pointed shape at the top, not like a cone, but not rounded either. Its nose was flat and wide, more human-looking than ape-like. I couldn't fully assess its arms, since they were holding the deer, but they appeared long and powerful. The legs were massive, with disproportionately long thighs and knees positioned lower than a human's would be. The whole creature was lean, but incredibly wide, at least twice as wide as a large man. I'd estimate it weighed well over 600 pounds. I'd gone maybe 100 yards past, when my cop instincts finally overrode my shock. I had to confirm what I'd seen. There was a culvert ahead that gave me just enough space to turn around, and I did, quickly but carefully. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I drove back to the spot, maybe 30 seconds later at most, and trained my lights on where the creature had been standing. Nothing. It had vanished. I sat there for several minutes, scanning the field with my lights, even got out my flashlight and shined it around, but saw no sign of the creature or the deer. The sugarcane barely moved in the slight breeze, giving no indication that something massive had just pushed through it. For a brief moment, I considered getting out and investigating the area on foot. That thought lasted about 2 seconds. Despite my training and the 9mm on my hip, there was no way I was going to pursue this thing into pitch-black sugarcane fields at 1 a.m. I'm not ashamed to admit that. Whatever this was, it was far larger and stronger than me, and clearly at home in the darkness in a way I wasn't. What really stuck with me was the intelligence I saw. This wasn't just a large animal. The way it maintained eye contact, the way it adjusted its position to watch me. There was calculation there, awareness, and strangely, no aggression. It seemed more surprised than threatening, like I'd interrupted its hunting. I sat in my vehicle for about 15 minutes, scanning the area, trying to process what I'd seen. Eventually, I drove on, checking my rearview mirror obsessively. I called a trusted colleague when I got home, someone who's worked in wildlife management for years. He listened without interrupting, then asked for specific details that only someone who'd actually seen something would know to describe. How the joints bent, the proportions, the way it moved. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're not the first," he finally said. He told me about reports they'd received over the years from that general area. Unusual tracks, strange vocalizations, livestock disturbances. Nothing concrete enough to investigate officially, but enough to make them privately wonder. The next day, I considered going back to look for evidence, tracks, hair, anything. But a heavy rain had moved through overnight, and I knew any physical evidence would be gone. Part of me was relieved, to be honest. I wasn't sure I wanted to find proof. Since that night, I've become more attentive to local stories, keeping an ear out for unusual wildlife reports or missing pets. I've heard things that would make more sense now, given what I saw, but I've kept my experience mostly to myself, until now. I know how this sounds. I know the skepticism I'd face if I reported this officially. I've questioned myself countless times. Was it a bear standing upright? No, the proportions were all wrong, and I've never seen a bear that tall or with those features. A man in a costume? At 1 a.m. in remote sugarcane fields, holding a freshly killed deer with a broken neck? That makes even less sense. The truth is, I saw what I saw. I wouldn't have believed it if someone else told me this story. But experiencing it firsthand leaves no room for doubt in my mind. There was a massive, non-human bipedal creature holding a dead deer on Highway 76 that night. What keeps me up sometimes isn't just the encounter itself, but the implications. If these creatures are real, and I now believe they are, they're intelligent enough to remain largely hidden, despite inhabiting areas not far from human development. They're strong enough to kill and carry deer with ease. And they're watching us, even as we remain largely oblivious to them. I drive that stretch of highway differently now. I'm more alert, more aware of the tree lines and field edges. I don't use the high beams as much, preferring the more targeted illumination of my ditch lights. And sometimes, when I pass particularly dense areas of undergrowth or tall sugarcane, I can't shake the feeling that something might be watching me from just beyond the reach of my lights. This wasn't my first strange experience in those backwoods, but it was by far the clearest and most undeniable. I don't know what to call what I saw, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or something else entirely. What I do know is that our understanding of what exists in the remote corners of our world is far from complete. I don't have a neat conclusion to this. No follow-up encounter, no physical evidence I can point to. Just the absolute certainty of what I witnessed on that dark stretch of Louisiana highway, and the knowledge that when I drive through similar areas now, I'm not always the largest predator around. Story 15. I've been driving the Pacific Stage Line's route for close to 8 years now, and I never thought I'd be typing something like this. Hell, I never thought I'd see what I saw last Tuesday. I'm still having trouble sleeping. My wife says I wake up shouting some nights. It was August 16th, around 6:30 in the morning. I had just started my regular route from Vancouver heading toward Mission. The morning couldn't have been better for driving. Clear skies, perfect visibility, hardly any traffic that early. Just the kind of morning where you thank your lucky stars you get to drive through such beautiful country for a living. I had about half a dozen passengers on board. The Williams couple. They take my bus every Tuesday to visit their daughter in Mission, a young fellow who looked like he hadn't slept in days, and 3 others I didn't recognize. Regular morning, regular folks. We were cruising along that stretch of highway just outside Mission. You know the one, where the forest gets real thick on both sides and the road curves gently around the hillside. I wasn't going more than 35 miles per hour. Didn't need to rush. And honestly, I was enjoying the morning too much to speed through it. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought maybe a large bear had wandered onto the road, but it was walking upright. Then I figured maybe it was a man, a really big man wearing some kind of coat. But as it moved further into the road, I realized it was neither. This thing, and I'm not exaggerating here, had to be at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, almost black in some places, walking on 2 legs across the highway like it had every right to be there. I'm not some city boy who doesn't know the difference between a bear and a deer. I've lived in British Columbia my whole life. I know what belongs in these forests and what doesn't. This didn't belong. Holy hell, look at the Sasquatch, I shouted before I could stop myself. Everyone around here knows about the Sasquatch stories. They've been part of the local talk forever. Native legends, logger tales, that sort of thing. I never gave them much thought until that moment. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to, sending everyone lurching forward. The Williams woman let out a little yelp of surprise. But nobody complained once they saw what I was pointing at. The creature had stopped in the middle of the road and turned toward the bus. I'll never forget how it looked at us. Not scared, not aggressive, just aware. Like it was sizing us up just as much as we were sizing it up. Then it just continued across the road and disappeared into the trees on the other side. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just pure stupid adrenaline. But I threw the bus into park, told everyone to stay put, and jumped out the door. "Mr. Lindquist, what are you doing?" Mrs. Williams called after me, but I was already jogging down the road. The highway shoulder was rocky and uneven, but I barely noticed as I ran toward where the creature had entered the woods. There was a small dried-up creek bed between the road and the forest line, and that's when I smelled it. God, that smell! Like wet dog mixed with rotting meat and something else I can't even describe. So strong it made my eyes water. I've gutted fish all my life and worked around all sorts of animals, but this stench was something else entirely. I slowed down as I reached the creek bed, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, not animal tracks, not human tracks, but something in between. 5 distinct impressions pressed deep into the sand and gravel. These weren't bear tracks. Bears have 5 toes, sure, but these were shaped like a human foot, just massive, had to be at least 16 inches long, with 5 toes clearly visible. The stride between them was huge too, maybe 4 feet apart. Whatever made these was taking steps twice as long as mine. I followed them to where they led into the brush. The bushes were pushed aside, branches broken where something large had forced its way through. I hesitated at the forest edge. I'm not a small man, been working physical jobs all my life, but whatever made those tracks was much bigger than me. Still, I pressed on. Don't ask me why. Stupid curiosity, I guess. The forest was dense, but there was a clear path where the brush had been trampled down. I followed it about 30 feet in, where the trees grew so thick that the morning sunlight barely filtered through. That's when I stopped dead in my tracks. It was standing there, partially hidden behind a massive Douglas fir, watching me. In the dim forest light, I could make out its features more clearly than I wanted to. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, probably more. Built like a heavyweight boxer, but larger, broader. Must have weighed over 300 pounds, all of it looking like muscle under that hair. The hair covered its entire body, dark brown, almost black, but with a reddish tint in the patches where the sunlight hit it. Its face is what haunts me most at night. Not quite human, not quite ape. A broad, flat nose with flaring nostrils, deep-set eyes that caught what little light there was and reflected it back red. Not the dull red of a deer's eyes in headlights, but a sharp, intelligent red. They were squinted slightly, like it was studying me. We stood there, just staring at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering so hard I swear it must have heard it. It was breathing heavy, its massive chest rising and falling. Not from exertion, it hadn't been running, but it seemed agitated, uncertain, like it was deciding what to do about me. I don't know how long we stood there, probably only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then it made this sound. Not a growl, not a grunt, something deeper. Something I felt more than heard, like it vibrated in my chest. That broke the spell. Suddenly I remembered I was 30 feet into dense forest, alone with something twice my size that could probably tear me apart without breaking a sweat. It moved first, turning suddenly and crashing away through the underbrush to my left. The sound of snapping branches and heavy footfalls spurred me into action, and I turned and ran in the opposite direction as fast as my legs would carry me. I've never run so fast in my life. Branches whipped at my face, I tripped over roots, but I didn't slow down until I burst out of the tree line and saw my bus still idling on the road. By the time I reached the bus, I was gasping for air. My shirt was soaked through with sweat. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the handrail to pull myself back on board. "Did you see it?" the young man asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "Everyone off the bus," I managed between breaths. "Come look at this." I led them all back to the creek bed. The footprints were still there, pressed deep into the sandy soil. Mrs. Williams gasped when she saw them. Her husband knelt down and put his hand next to one. His whole hand barely covered the heel portion. "What kind of animal makes a print like this?" one of the other passengers asked. Nobody had an answer. We searched for more prints, but the ground everywhere else was either paved or too rocky to hold impressions. After a few minutes, I herded everyone back onto the bus. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the wheel. About a mile down the road, I stopped at a roadside telephone box and called the local police. I'm sure the officer thought I was drunk or crazy, but I insisted what I'd seen was real. When we finally pulled into Mission, there were 2 police cruisers waiting. The officers took statements from all the passengers. Some were more excited than scared, especially the younger ones. The Williams couple backed up my story completely. "Never believed in those old stories," Mr. Williams told the officer, "but those tracks weren't made by any animal I know, and I've been hunting these woods for 40 years. The police said they'd send someone to check out the spot, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. Can't blame them, I guess. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I'd have thought they were pulling my leg or had been hitting the bottle. It's been 5 days now. The company gave me a few days off, said I seemed shaken up. That's putting it mildly. I haven't been back to that stretch of road yet. I'm due to drive that route again tomorrow, and the thought makes my stomach knot up. The local paper ran a small story about it. Bus driver claims Sasquatch sighting near Mission. Makes me sound like some attention-seeking fool. But those passengers saw the tracks too. They saw how that thing had pushed through the brush like it was nothing. I keep replaying that moment in the forest when it looked at me. There was something in those eyes, something knowing. Not just animal awareness, but something... I don't know how to explain it. Like it recognized what I was, same as I recognized it wasn't just some bear or known animal. The police never found anything, of course. Said the tracks could have been faked, or could have been from a large bear walking strangely. They didn't find any hair samples or other evidence. By the time they got there, it had rained a bit, and the tracks weren't as clear. But I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. That stench still comes back to me sometimes. I'll be eating dinner or reading the paper, and suddenly it's like it's right there in my nostrils again. I've lived in British Columbia all my life and driven that route hundreds of times. I know every curve, every tree line, every hill. I know what belongs in those forests and what doesn't. That thing didn't belong. Or maybe it's that we don't belong in its territory. I'm driving the same route tomorrow. The company says I can switch routes if I want, but that feels like giving in to fear. Besides, what are the chances of seeing something like that twice? But I'll tell you this, I'm not stopping the bus this time. And I'm sure as hell not following anything into those woods again. I still don't know what to make of what happened. Was it really what the natives call Sasquatch? Some unknown species living in our forests? Or was it something else entirely? All I know is what I saw, what I smelled, and what I felt when those red eyes locked with mine. And no matter what anyone says, no matter what the papers write or how the police explain it away, I know it was real. And sometimes, when I'm driving that stretch of road now, I catch myself scanning the tree line, wondering if it's watching me from the shadows, wondering if our paths will cross again. I hope to God they don't.